I was pouring coffee into Evelyn's blue-rimmed mug when I saw the doctor's envelope tucked behind the toaster manual on the sideboard. It had already been opened, not torn by the post office, not slit ragged by my own thumb. Opened neatly, the flap lifted with something thin and careful, then pushed back down as if whoever had done it believed the lie would hold if the room stayed quiet enough around it. For a few seconds I stood there with the coffee pot warming my hand and felt a coldness move through me that had nothing to do with age. I live in the same ranch house my wife and I bought in 1981 when interest rates were bad. The kitchen linoleum was uglier than sin, and both boys still thought sleeping in the back seat during house hunting counted as helping. The linoleum has been replaced twice. The cabinets are still the same maple boxes Evelyn insisted could be made to last if you treated hinges like they were part of the family. The house sits on a broad lot at the end of a quiet road in Columbus, not far enough from things to feel rural, not close enough in to feel crowded. In March, the backyard turns into a wet green argument with itself. The chain-link fence goes silver under rain. The low maple by the garage drips until noon. If you stand at the kitchen sink in the morning, as I do most mornings, you can see the mudroom side door reflected in the window glass behind you. Evelyn liked that. She said a woman should always know two things at once, what was coming in and what was going out. She had been gone 19 months, and I still moved through the house as if she might come back from the other room and tell me I was loading the dishwasher wrong. That morning had begun the way most mornings did. I woke before the alarm I no longer needed, lay still long enough to hear the refrigerator hum settle into itself and the heat click through the vents, reached across the bed to the flat, cold space where nobody slept now, sat up, took the pills left in the white tray by the lamp, stood in the bathroom and looked at my face long enough to decide I was still recognizable. Then I went to the kitchen, turned on the small light over the sink, put the kettle on, out of habit, even though I was making coffee, and opened the side door to let in the air. The house smelled like old wood warmed from within coffee grounds, and that faint mineral odor wet Ohio mornings have in March, as if the dirt itself has been taken out and rinsed clean overnight. There was also the smell of the lemon oil I'd used on the table Sunday afternoon because Mike had once said the place always smelled like Mom when it smelled like lemon and coffee together. Mike had not been here in 8 months. Danny had been here the night before, and the night before that, and half the nights for longer than I could have said cleanly. He lived 15 minutes away in Gahanna, worked in facilities management for a private rehab center out near Reynoldsburg, and came by just to check on things, which in practice meant he let himself in through the mudroom, put groceries where he believed they should go, frowned at the salt shaker, checked the thermostat, and asked if I had taken my meds in the tone men use when they are pretending not to sound like wardens. I had let him do it because that is what people told me a man my age ought to be grateful for. There are humiliations that do not announce themselves with any dignity. They arrive wearing concern. They carry paper towels and take out soup. They move your mail 2 feet to the left because it looks tidier there. After Evelyn died, everybody in one way or another wanted me arranged. Fed, checked on, spoken for before I asked for anything. Danny had simply been best at it, or fastest. I set the coffee pot down and crossed to the sideboard. The envelope had my doctor's return address in the upper left corner, and my name written in that machine-printed blue I had always disliked because it made even ordinary health matters look like bad news. It had been folded once where somebody had pressed a thumb too hard over the center. The top flap had been slit with a precision Evelyn would have admired in almost any other circumstance. I knew I had not opened it because I do not put opened mail behind manuals. Evelyn kept the sideboard sorted with an order so practical it looked casual. Bills in the ceramic tray by the lamp, catalogs under the telephone directory, recipes from friends under the cookbooks if she meant to try them, manuals together in the left cabinet because, as she liked to say, you only need those when you're already annoyed. Important medical paper never got hidden. She believed if a thing concerned your body, it deserved to be looked at in daylight. I slid the folded sheet from the envelope and read it standing up. It was a routine summary from my primary care visit the week before. Blood pressure. Medication list. Note to continue monitoring dizziness and fatigue. Recommendation to discuss dosage adjustment if symptoms persisted. Nothing there was dramatic. Nothing there ought to have made my fingers go cold. What bothered me was not the letter itself. It was the fact that someone else had seen it first and decided I did not need to. I looked around the kitchen as though the room might be capable of offering an explanation. The butcher block table sat under the window with the placemat I still used out of habit because Evelyn had bought 6 matching ones, and I could not bear the thought of mixing them with anything newer. Her little basil pot on the sill held mostly sticks now because I had overwatered it in February. The refrigerator door carried 2 magnets from places we had gone years ago. A grocery list written in Danny's blocky handwriting from 3 days earlier, and the paper wall calendar Evelyn had always used, though after she died, Danny had started writing my appointments on it in black marker instead of the blue ballpoint she preferred. The mark for my doctor visit the week before sat on Tuesday Square in heavy black letters, big enough to be read from the street. I hated those letters. I did not know I hated them until I saw them then. The mudroom door was shut but not latched all the way, just enough gap at the edge to show grey light. Danny had done that since he was 16 when he came in, loaded up with baseball gear, and did not want to drop anything to pull the door closed. Evelyn used to call after him Daniel Mercer. "This is not a barn," and he would grin and say, "No, ma'am," which worked on her more often than it ought to have. I stood there, looking at that narrow strip of light and the already opened envelope in my hand, and had the disagreeable sense that something in my own house had begun to happen in advance of me. I told myself not to be foolish. I said it aloud the way you do when you live alone too long. "Don't be foolish, Tom." The sound of my own voice in that room was lonelier than silence. I sat down and read the summary again. The note about dizziness was there, yes, because I had mentioned that I'd been a little off balance some mornings. The fatigue, too. I had blamed the weather, age grief, bad sleep, all the acceptable things. The older you get, the easier it is to receive physical decline if it comes dressed in BA terms. Tired, a little lightheaded, off your feed, not yourself lately. Every one of those phrases leaves you enough dignity to keep going. What I could not fit cleanly in my head was why Danny would have opened the letter. I knew without much effort that it had been Danny. Not because I had caught him, because Leah had not been in the house in 2 months, Mike never touched paper that did not belong to him, and nobody else came through the side door with the kind of confidence required to edit another man's morning. I told myself he had probably seen the envelope when he brought over groceries and thought he was helping. I told myself he might have wanted to remind me what the doctor had said because I had been distracted at the appointment. I told myself a dozen versions of the same thing, all of them built around one central humiliation, that help makes you generous toward trespass, because to object would be to admit how much room the trespasser already has. I folded the paper carefully and slid it back into the envelope, though not behind the manual. I set it in the ceramic tray where it belonged. Then I drank my coffee and tasted nothing. By 9:30, the rain had begun in earnest, a fine slanting kind that darkened the deck boards and made the side yard smell like wet mulch and old bark. I rinsed dishes, wiped the counter twice, and stood too long looking at the calendar on the refrigerator. Danny had written my cardiology follow-up for next Thursday and circled it. He had also written pick-up refillable the Tuesday Square before yesterday, though I did not remember asking him to. Maybe I had and forgotten. That too is how the trap works. Every uncertainty becomes a reason to trust the person who says he remembers for you. The pill bottle on the counter was nearly empty. I picked it up. Lisinopril, my blood pressure medication. White cap, label curling at one corner. I had enough for maybe 2 days if I stretched. Danny had said the night before, while moving leftover chicken into a different container because he disliked the lid I had used, that he thought he'd already handled the refill. I remember the exact phrasing because it had irritated me even then. I think I already handled that. Not picked it up. Not called it in. Handled it as if my medication were a problem in a larger inventory system. I checked the bottle again. The label said it had been filled 6 days earlier. That made no sense to me. I do not count out pills like a suspicious husband in a bad television movie. I am not that man. I take what I am supposed to take and go on with my day. But I knew what 6 days' worth of pills looked like in that bottle, and this was not it. The plastic carried a faint clouded wear around the label, the kind that comes from being handled in and out of a coat pocket or truck cup holder, not sitting untouched on a kitchen counter for less than a week. There was also a faint ridge of old adhesive, where another pharmacy sticker might have been removed before, though I could not swear to that. What I could swear to was the feeling that the bottle in my hand had lived a longer life than the date on its face allowed. I put it down. Then I picked it back up. Then I felt absurd enough that I laughed once under my breath and did not like the sound of that either. At 10:15, I took my raincoat off the hook by the mudroom bench and decided I would drive to Bell's Pharmacy myself. Bell's sits in a small brick strip on a side road off Main between a tailor that has somehow survived 50 years of changing men's pants and a bakery that smells like butter 2 doors before you reach it. We had used Bell's since the boys were young because Evelyn liked places where people knew your face before they looked at your file. She said chain stores were for buying batteries and being forgotten. Marion, though everybody called her Marion, and she never corrected it. Belle had worked there with her husband for years, then alone after he died, and now with one younger tech who wore her hair so tightly back, it made my scalp ache to look at her. I had not been in personally for several months. Danny usually swung by after work, or so I had understood. I drove slower than usual, because the rain blurred the lanes and because there is something a man will not admit even to himself until he is halfway through doing it if he is driving to his pharmacy because he suspects his son may be handling his medication too freely. He is already scared. The parking lot shone dark and slick as a black stone. I sat in the truck for a moment, watching water tremble down the windshield, and remembered another rainy Thursday, maybe 6 years earlier, when Evelyn had called from this same passenger seat while I was in the hardware store and asked me very sharply for her whether Danny had picked up her thyroid refill. I'd come out with mulch clips and windshield wipers and found her sitting stiff as wire, staring at the phone in her hand. They released it to him without calling me, she said. I told them not to do that. I remember shrugging because he's our son Eve, and her turning toward the window and saying, "That is not the point." I had been mildly offended by her tone. Now, sitting in the rain outside Bell's, that memory came back into my chest with enough force to make me grip the wheel. That was the thing grief does to time. It rearranges it when you are not looking. A moment you thought was ordinary rises up years later with its true face on. Inside the pharmacy smelled the way good pharmacies always have: paper rubbing, alcohol, cardboard, faint sweetness from over-the-counter cough syrup, and behind all of it, the toasted sugar smell drifting in from the bakery next door. The bell over the door gave its little brass complaint. Marion looked up from the counter, reading glasses low on her nose, gray hair pinned back in the same practical twist Evelyn used to envy because hers would never stay put that neatly. "Well," she said, and gave me the first real smile I'd seen all morning. "Look who's decided to walk in under his own power." "I was told I still could," I said. "That depends who you ask." There was nobody else at the counter. The younger tech was sorting bottles on a shelf in the back. Marion's smile lingered half a second longer than it needed to, then changed as she took in my face. She had that gift some long-married women and pharmacists possess of looking at a man as if he is already a little transparent. "What do you need, Tom?" "I'm not entirely sure," I said, which was true enough. I set the pill bottle on the counter. "This says it was filled 6 days ago." "I'm almost out. I may be mixing myself up." She took the bottle and turned it in her hand. Not dramatically, just slowly. Her thumb paused over the label. Then she looked up at me over the top of her glasses. "Who's been picking these up for you?" The question did something unpleasant inside me because it was too direct, too quick to a point I had not yet offered. "My son sometimes," I said. "Danny, why?" She did not answer right away. Instead, she pulled the computer slightly toward her, typed. and glanced back at the bottle. I noticed then that my heart had started beating in a heavy, slow manner I associate with bad news and steep stairs. "I need to ask you something else," she said. "Have you changed your dosage recently?" "No." "Has Dr. Patel discussed changing it?" "He mentioned maybe adjusting if the dizziness keeps up." Her eyes sharpened just enough to make the skin at the back of my neck tighten. She lowered her voice. "Has anyone else been managing your medication?" I felt something in me rise in immediate defense. Not of Danny exactly. Of the arrangement, of the shape of things. A man does not spend months accepting help only to discover in public that the help may have included trespass. Pride gets there before reason. "My son helps out," I said too stiffly. "I'm not helpless. I didn't say you were." No accusation in her voice. That made it worse. She looked back at the screen, then at the bottle again, and I saw a change cross her face so small another man might have missed it. Not surprise. Recognition. Something recognized. "Tom," she said quietly, "did Evelyn ever speak to you about your refills?" The whole room seemed to draw in by half an inch. My wife's been dead 1.5 years. "I know that." "Then why are you asking me about her?" Because I was frightened, my voice came out harder than I intended. The tech in the back glanced up and then away. Marion waited, giving me the dignity of a few seconds. Then she removed her glasses, folded them, and set them on the counter beside the bottle. "Because your wife came in here more than once about this medication," she said. "And because she was worried." I stared at her. "She was particular," I said finally. "About everything medical." "Yes," Marion said. She was. And she asked me not to release certain refills through anyone else without direct confirmation from her. The rain against the storefront glass sounded suddenly louder. I could hear my own breathing. I could hear the faint tick of the old wall clock behind the consultations poster. I could smell the bakery sugar drifting under the sharper scent of antiseptic and wanted very badly to leave. She didn't tell me that. I'm beginning to think she may have had her reasons. That was when I should have asked a clear question. "What reasons? What exactly are you saying?" What did she know? But there are moments when a person senses the floor under his life has already shifted and cannot bear to hear it named cleanly. I looked at the bottle. Marion followed my gaze. "This bottle shouldn't look like this if it was freshly filled on the date printed," she said. "And the record attached to this refill doesn't match the way it came through. I can't tell you everything standing here in the open, but I can tell you this." She leaned slightly closer. "Your wife knew he was poisoning you." There are sentences that enter the body before they enter the mind. I felt that one in my stomach first, then in my hands. I had to place my palm flat on the counter to steady myself, and even then I was aware of how old my hand looked there, veined and pale and suddenly not fit for ordinary tasks. "That's a hell of a thing to say to somebody," I managed. "Yes," she said. "It is." "You're telling me my son. I am telling you your wife was frightened by a pattern. I am telling you I was uneasy then, and I am more uneasy now. I am telling you somebody has been managing access to your medication in a way that is not medically clean. And I am telling you not to dismiss that because it comes wrapped in family help." I wanted to be angry. Anger would have been easier to stand up inside than what I actually felt, which was a terrible, widening absence, as though the room had somehow moved farther away from me. "Poisoning," I said. "That's a dramatic word. It is also the word older people use when they don't want to say chronic underdosing substitution, withheld doses, or mixed fill custody." She slid the bottle back toward me. "Take whichever word hurts you least for the next 10 minutes. But do not ignore me." I do not remember leaving the pharmacy, except that at some point Marion pressed a stapled printout into my hand and told me to call her from home if I found anything in Evelyn's old paperwork. There were dates circled in mechanical pencil. Pickup records, maybe. My vision had gone slightly narrowed the way it does when you stand too fast. The bell over the door rang. Rain hit my face. I got into the truck and sat there with the engine off and the bottle on the passenger seat where Evelyn once kept maps. "Your wife knew he was poisoning you." The title of a cheap paperback. The line in a television movie. The kind of sentence ordinary men believe belongs to other families' badly written ones. And yet, there I sat at 72 in a grocery store parking lot, with rain threading down the windshield, and my wife's name tied to a knowledge she had never given me. I drove home slower than I had driven there. At every light I argued with Marion in my head. Evelyn was cautious, not frightened. Danny was over-involved, not dangerous. The bottle could have been switched accidentally. The dates could be clerical. The pickup issue could be some old nonsense from when Evelyn was ill herself and wanted control over everything because illness had made control feel like oxygen. Every version I built relied on one thing. If I could make her fear smaller, I would not have to make my blindness larger. The house looked exactly the same when I pulled in. Rain on the driveway, the side yard going dark, the mudroom light I had left on glowing amber through the narrow window in the door. That sameness offended me. There should have been some visible sign if the center of a man's life had just been shifted 2 inches to the left. Inside the kitchen held its noon quiet. Refrigerator hum. Drip from my coat onto the linoleum. The stale warmth houses keep when the weather cannot decide between winter and spring. I set the pharmacy printout on the table and stood staring at the junk drawer. It was the third drawer from the left under the side counter. Everybody in the family knew that. Batteries, scissors, tape, coupons, long-dead church supper flyers, packets of soy sauce from takeout we had not ordered in years, and under all of it, the brown leather envelope Evelyn kept for pharmacy slips and certain medical receipts. Because, as she once said, if a man starts taking 6 prescriptions after 60, he had better be able to prove somebody sold them to him. I pulled the drawer open. The envelope sat under a stack of seed catalogs and an old flashlight, brown leather gone soft and shiny at the corners. Snap missing on one side. My chest tightened when I saw it, not because it was dramatic, but because it was so ordinary. Evelyn's things hurt worst when they were useful. Her sweaters in the closet had become mostly cloth. Her handwriting on a grocery list still had force. I lifted the envelope out and felt at once how full it was. For a second, I almost put it back. Then I carried it to the table and sat down. The leather smelled faintly of dust-old paper and the cold hand lotion Evelyn used in winter that never quite left the things she handled often. I ran my thumb over the crease by the flap and remembered so sharply it stung one evening in late October, maybe 3 years before she died. She had been standing exactly where I sat now, folding a receipt into quarters with that concentrated look she got when trying not to say more than she meant to. I asked why in God's name she kept every little pharmacy slip like we were preparing for an audit, and she said, "Because once people start speaking about your health for you, paper matters." I had laughed then. Not cruelly, just dismissively. "Who's speaking about my health for me?" I said. She looked up, and for half a second there was something in her face I did not understand. That she said softly is what I'm trying to keep from happening. I had forgotten that moment until Marion spoke. Forgotten is not the right word. Misfiled. Rendered harmless by the years until it no longer threatened the story I preferred. My hands were not steady when I opened the envelope. The first things inside were exactly what I expected: old prescription information sheets folded twice. A couple of copay receipts, one lab bill, a specialist card from when Evelyn had her biopsy, and a wad of pharmacy bag staples still attached to torn white strips of paper. Under those sat a stack of older slips folded into the hard, neat quarters she favored when she meant to save space or emphasis. I laid them out on the table one by one. Dates, names of drugs, copays, pickup times. The paper was thin enough that my fingertips felt warm through it. I did not know what I was looking for yet. That is a strange part of beginning to fear the truth. Your eyes move with purpose before your mind can articulate the crime. I sorted the slips by year first, then by month. Then I found 3 from last fall attached together with a pharmacy staple, and one of them made me stop. Lisinopril. Filled October the 12th. Pickup 5:43 p.m. I stared at it for a long time. On October the 12th, I had been sitting in St. Anne's with Evelyn for 6 hours while they checked her after a bad shortness of breath episode. I knew that because the memory rose instantly complete, the too-cold room, the scratch in my throat from vending machine coffee. Danny arriving near dark with a navy jacket for me because he said I looked pale. Evelyn turning her face away from him when he tried to adjust her blanket. I remembered getting home near 8:30 and finding my evening pill where I had left it in the tray by the sink. If there had been a fresh refill picked up at 5:43 that evening, I had never seen the bag. I went still. Rain tapped the window over the sink. A car hissed past on the road out front. Somewhere in the house, the floor vent gave a soft metal knock as the heat cycled up. I pulled the bottle I had brought home from Bell's closer and looked at the printed refill date again. Then back at the October slip. Then at 2 November slips paper clipped together beneath it. My heart had begun to beat in that heavy, measured way again, and I was conscious now of a little numbness in my left thumb where I had been pinching paper too hard. There was another slip in the envelope folded smaller than the others. I opened it. On the back in Evelyn's handwriting were 4 words. Call yourself. Don't send D. The room tipped slightly. I shut my eyes. Not because I faint. I do not. Because sometimes shutting your eyes is the last available gesture of refusal. When I opened them again, I heard the mudroom door, not the bell at the front, not a knock. The soft, familiar inward push, then the snap as it caught the frame. Danny. His footsteps crossed the mudroom, confident, unhurried, carrying weather in with him. Grocery bag rustle, the little clink of keys set down near the bench. Every one of those sounds had belonged to help an hour earlier. Now they entered my body differently. Dad, he called. You home? I looked down at the slips spread across the table and without entirely deciding to slid the folded note under my hand. In here, I said. He came through the doorway carrying a plastic bag from Kroger and wearing his work fleece damp at the shoulders. Danny is a good-looking man in the way local men often are when they have not abused themselves too badly, broad through the chest, still enough hair to suggest effort, face open until you notice how quickly it closes when challenged. He gave me his usual half-smile, the one that implied equal parts fondness and management. You went out in this, he said, glancing toward the window. Roads are lousy. I managed. Yeah, well. He set the bag on the counter and moved automatically toward the refrigerator. I brought soup sandwich bread and the low-sodium turkey you're supposed to be buying instead of the other stuff. He stopped then because he had seen the papers on the table. What's all this? I watched his face, and because I was frightened, I saw more than I might have yesterday. Not guilt flashing. People imagine guilt flashes because they want stories simple. What I saw was calculation checking the room. How much had I seen? What had I connected? Which version of his voice ought to come out first? Just going through some of your mother's old paperwork, I said. He nodded too fast. Okay, you want me to help now? He gave a small shrug and turned back to the refrigerator, opening it with the easy entitlement of long habit. You're almost out of broth, he said. I told you Monday. I did not answer. He shut the refrigerator and looked over at the bottle beside my hand. Did you get the refill situation squared away? The sentence itself might have meant nothing. The ordinary traffic of care. But something in the word squared something in the way he said, refill situation, as if the issue already had known dimensions between us, made the hair rise on my arms. I stopped by Bell's, I said carefully. He turned fully toward me then. Good. I figured there might be some confusion over the dosage adjustment. My mouth went dry. There had been no dosage adjustment. He could not have known Marion had raised the possibility unless he already carried that line in his mind. Unless he had already prepared for it. Unless he had been living for longer than I understood one sentence ahead of me. Rain moved against the window in a steady gray sheet. Danny stood between the refrigerator and the sink with his damp shoulders and grocery bag and helpful son face. My hand rested on Evelyn's folded note under the heel of my palm. On the table before me lay a refill slip from an evening I had never received one. And my son, who had not yet been told anything, had just spoken as though the argument at the center of my life had already been handled. Danny stood where he was for a second too long after he said it. Confusion over the dosage adjustment. I kept my face still because older men learn, if they learn anything useful, that stillness can buy you 3 seconds your fear would otherwise waste. My hand remained flat over Evelyn's folded note. The slips lay spread between us like something unfinished and domestic. Rain pressed softly at the window over the sink. The refrigerator hummed its ordinary refrigerator hum. Nothing in the room had changed except meaning. What dosage adjustment? I asked. Danny's eyes flicked once toward the bottle, once toward my face, then settled somewhere just left of me. It was a look I had seen in him since he was a boy, trying to backfill an explanation after breaking something in the garage. The one Patel was thinking about, he said. You said last week he might raise it if the dizziness didn't let up. I said he might discuss it. Right. He gave that little half nod again, as if we were straightening out a harmless misunderstanding in a hardware aisle. That's what I mean. He turned back to the groceries before I could answer, and that movement bothered me more than if he had argued. He moved like a man already confident of the room. Opened the refrigerator, bent and set the broth on the lower shelf, shifted my mustard to make more room, pulled out the old deli turkey without asking, checked the date and threw it away. The sound of the refrigerator door shelves rattling made me unreasonably angry. Don't do that, I said. He looked over his shoulder. Do what? Throw away my lunch meat? It was slimy. I was going to finish it tomorrow. Dad. There are whole family histories stored inside one word said in one tone. The dad. He gave me then held exasperation, pity, correction, and the assumption that my objection belonged to a smaller category than his judgment. I had heard it from him before and registered it only as irritation. Now it seemed to arrive with an older freight. Not disrespect exactly, possession. He tied the deli bag into a knot and dropped it into the trash under the sink. You can't keep stuff past date, he said. Not with your blood pressure and the meds issue. There it was again. The meds issue, as if he and I were already standing inside a shared medical problem he understood from above. I said, What makes you think there is a meds issue? That gave him pause. He shut the refrigerator door and faced me fully this time. You said yourself you were almost out early. I'm not making a federal case out of it. I didn't say I was out early. He smiled slightly, not warmly. Okay. That okay frightened me more than denial would have. A good liar will fight you if he needs to. A practiced one lets the question slide and waits to see what you do with your own uncertainty. He walked to the sink, ran water over his hands, dried them on the striped dish towel Evelyn had used until it frayed white at the fold, and then did the thing he always did when he meant to reclaim the space. He leaned one hip against the counter and lowered his voice as if we were allies in a matter involving my own body. If Marion spooked you, he said you should have called me before driving in that weather. She gets old school about compliance. You know how pharmacists are. I looked at him. Do I? He shrugged again. They see one discrepancy and suddenly everybody's running an underground operation. He smiled at his own joke. I did not. The rain thickened outside. I could hear the downspout on the back corner of the house beginning to gurgle. Danny watched me, and I had the sickening impression that he was measuring how much ground his tone had recovered. What did she say? He asked. I had no clear plan, but I knew enough not to give him Marion. Not yet. The instinct arrived complete and cold, and its completeness scared me almost as much as the rest of it. Men who have trusted too long do not like discovering that suspicion can become native in a single afternoon. She said I should keep better track, I said, which I've been telling you. There it was. Not concern exactly. Vindication. He crossed to the table then and reached toward one of the slips near my elbow. I moved my hand over the pile before I fully thought it through. Just a little. Not dramatic. Enough. His eyes went to my hand and then back to my face. You okay? He asked. Fine. You look pale. It's been a long day. He nodded slowly. Do you want me to handle the refill from here? No. The answer struck inside me so fast and clear, I almost said it with too much force. Instead, I heard myself say, no, I'll do it. A small silence fell. Okay, he said at last. Suit yourself. He took his keys from the mudroom bench, clipped them back inside his pocket, and bent to tie his left boot where the lace had loosened. That should not have mattered to me. Men tie boots, suns come and go, houses creak around ordinary things. Yet I found myself watching the black carabiner inside his pocket, the side door key glinting once under the kitchen light, and thinking with a force that made my pulse knock in my throat. How many times has he come in here before me? He stood again, looked around the room. Once the way Evelyn used to before leaving the house, counter, stove, calendar, sink, except where Evelyn's look had been a final, tidy measure of care. His felt like ownership. I'll come by tomorrow evening, he said. We need to get ahead of Thursday anyway. What's Thursday? He frowned at the calendar. Cardiology follow-up. I looked over at the refrigerator and saw the thick black circle around the square. He left through the mudroom and shut the door fully behind him this time. The snap of the latch echoed through the kitchen like a small, hard judgment. I stayed at the table until the truck's sound was gone from the road. Then I drew my hand off Evelyn's note and unfolded it again. Call yourself. Don't send D. Her handwriting was small, practical, slanted slightly forward from years of making grocery lists and school forms and church potluck labels. I ran my finger over the indentation of the ballpoint and remembered another evening I had not let mean what it meant. She had been standing by the refrigerator in her robe, tired from chemo, looking at the wall calendar while Danny put containers in the freezer. He had labeled each one with painter's tape because he'd begun doing that after her second round made her too sick to think about dates. I remember being grateful, then absurdly grateful, because gratitude is a narcotic when the person you love is ill, and somebody offers to make the days look orderly. Evelyn stood there longer than she should have needed to stand and then said in that mild voice she used when she was choosing her footing, You don't need to mark every little thing, sweetheart. I can still read. Danny laughed and kissed her temple and said, I know you can, Mom. I'm just making it easier on Dad. At the time, I heard kindness. Now what came back to me was not his sentence but her face after he turned away. Not anger, not even fear. Something more exhausted than either. The look of a woman realizing that what she objects to will be called generosity by the men around her. I sat with that until the room felt smaller. Then I began sorting the slips again. The first impossible October refill had unsettled me. The second one frightened me. A receipt from November showed a pickup time at 6:11 p.m. On a Monday, I knew Danny had come by after work with chili from a fundraiser and 2 new furnace filters. I remembered him setting the pharmacy bag by the bread box while he changed one filter in the hallway return vent and complaining that I still bought the cheap kind. I remembered the bag because Evelyn had pointed at it and said, Leave it there. Her voice had carried more steel than the moment seemed to justify. He left it. Later that night, after she went to bed, I found the bag gone and thought no more about it. There it was now on paper, but I could not remember opening that refill either. Maybe that by itself meant nothing. Maybe people forget more than they like to admit. But as I kept going, I began noticing a difference in Evelyn's folding. Some slips were folded flat in halves, ordinary storage. Others had been pressed into hard little quarters, edges lined exactly, sometimes with one date underlined, or one medication circled in the mechanical pencil she stole from the kitchen drawer whenever a pen felt too blunt. She had not been keeping paper. She had been sorting worry. That realization cost me more than it should have. I had spent 19 months preserving my wife in memory. The way a man presses flowers in a Bible, flattening the complexity into something tender and still. Evelyn, the practical one. Evelyn, the steady one. Evelyn, the woman who kept us all fed and remembered birthdays and knew where every appliance manual lived and how much gravy a holiday table actually needed instead of what recipes pretended. I had been careful with her in my head because grief demands curation when the alternative is collapse. Now I was beginning to see a different woman moving through the same rooms. Not a different person, a different pressure. A woman trying to put small brakes on something I had not even noticed gathering speed. By 4:30, the kitchen had gone blue with afternoon rain. I switched on the light over the sink and then the one above the stove. Their warm cones only made the room feel more enclosed. The sideboard, the calendar, the mudroom bench, the refrigerator notes, everything familiar had started to acquire a second outline, as if one house was sitting on top of another, and I had only just learned to see the seam. I went to the freezer. I am not a man who rummages through leftovers like a detective, and yet there I was, kneeling on the linoleum in my socks, pulling out square containers and turning them in the cold light from inside the freezer drawer. Chicken noodle, beef stew, vegetable soup low sodium, turkey chili, each labeled in Danny's handwriting, each dated, some with little notations lunch evening post-appointment. Post-appointment. I stared at that one for a long time. The painter's tape had yellowed a little at the corners, which told me it had been in there a while. Post-appointment in Danny's thick black block letters. Not after Evelyn's appointment. Not after his own. Mine. The phrase was intimate in a way I had never before objected to. He had begun arranging my meals around my medical movement, as if my body were a household calendar event to be prepared for. I set the container on the table beside the receipts. Then another thing came back to me. One morning in January, after a cardiology check, Danny had come by with a cooler bag and unpacked soup broth, crackers, cut fruit, and one of those bland, low-sodium turkey sandwiches from a chain deli. "You'll want easy stuff tonight," he'd said. I remember being touched because a man does not expect his son in his 40s to think through the digestive consequences of a stress test. Evelyn was gone by then. I had been so hungry for signs that someone still anticipated my life from inside the house that I let the tenderness of the gesture eclipse the strangeness of its precision. How did he know what I'd want? How often had he begun deciding it? The phone rang. I startled badly enough to hit my elbow on the freezer drawer. The sound was the old wall phone by the refrigerator, not my cell. I never did switch fully to the cell because Evelyn said if people had to dig too hard to reach you, eventually they would stop digging. I crossed the kitchen and took the receiver down. "Hello, Tom?" It was Marion. Her voice being in my kitchen instead of at the counter made the whole day seem to tilt another degree. "Yes." "Are you alone?" The question arrived low and plain. "Yes." "Did he come by?" I gripped the receiver tighter. "You mind telling me why you're asking that?" "I'm asking because if he has regular access to your house, you need to be careful what paper you leave where." I should have said that earlier. Something in the back of my neck went cold again. I looked around the kitchen automatically at the table, the freezer container, the spread slips, the open drawer. "He was here," I said. A small pause. "Did you tell him you came to see me?" "Not exactly." "Good." The word was almost a whisper, not theatrical. Worse for that reason. I lowered my voice instinctively, though there was nobody in the house but me. "Marion, I need you to stop talking around this." "I'm not talking around it. I'm talking carefully." "Then talk carefully and directly." The rain rattled against the window over the sink. In the line's faint silence, I could hear a register beep somewhere in her store and the distant muffled sound of the young tech saying something to a customer. "Your refill records over the last year show a pattern," Marion said quietly. "Not every month." "Enough months." Pickups by Danny when Evelyn had asked us to call first on specific medications. Then, after she passed the account reverting to normal, and then shifting again in ways that don't match standard renewals. There were also 2 times I documented that your reported tolerance didn't line up with the dispensed dose. What does that mean? It means someone may have been controlling what reached you or when. I am not accusing on the basis of one paper discrepancy. I'm telling you the pattern is not clean. My mouth had gone dry. Why didn't you tell me sooner? You are not the one coming in. The sentence hit me like something dropped from height. I leaned one shoulder against the wall beside the phone. The wallpaper there still had the tiny faded blue vine Evelyn insisted was cheerful, and I had always considered unnecessary. I could feel the slight raised seam where the paper joined near the corner. Did Evelyn tell you she thought Danny was doing this? I asked. No. Then, how can you say she knew? Because she was trying to limit him without naming him. Because she came in once in tears and once angry, and once quiet in a way that frightened me more than either. Because she stopped asking whether a thing was possible and started asking what kind of records we kept when someone else picked up medication. Women who have run houses for 40 years know when help has turned into handling Tom. I shut my eyes, and because Marian said after a moment softer now, I have seen this before. I did not ask her where. I did not want some other family's rot in my kitchen with us. What am I supposed to do, I said. First, don't confront him alone unless you have to. Second, check your old doctor summaries and call back notes if Evelyn kept them. Third call, Dr. Patel's office yourself and ask for a copy of the last 6 months of visit summaries and any notes related to reported symptoms or dosage concerns. I opened my eyes and looked toward the den off the kitchen. The door stood half open. From where I was, I could see only the corner of the desk Danny had helped me reorganize in December and the lamp with the brass base Evelyn used when paying bills. Why the summaries? Because if somebody's been speaking for you to the office, it may show up in the chart language. How would you know that? Because the refill questions came through with wording that did not sound like you. I said nothing. Tom, she said. Yes. If you find anything that makes your stomach drop, trust that feeling before you explain it away. The line clicked lightly on her end, not hung up exactly, just a shift of hand. There's one more thing, she said. What? Evelyn asked once whether we could note on your file that pickup verification should come from her voice specifically, not just family. I asked if she wanted to file a formal concern. She said no. She said she was trying to keep peace in the house. My knees felt suddenly unreliable. I slid down into the kitchen chair nearest the phone, the receiver cord stretching across the floor in a pale coil. Did she say why? No. We sat in silence for a breath. Then Marian said very quietly, "Not every kind of help is safe." I almost dropped the receiver, because I had heard those words before. Not from Marian. From Ruth Ann Holcomb, 2 days after Evelyn's funeral, standing at my mudroom door with a Pyrex dish of scalloped potatoes and the hard, careful face women wear when they are trying to tell a grieving man something without being asked to leave. She had looked past me into the kitchen where Danny was relabeling casseroles for freezer storage and said, "Tom, you just take your time. Not every kind of help is safe when everybody's still raw." I remember bristling, then offended on Danny's behalf and on my own, because people who are raw do not like their shelter questioned. I had said, perhaps more sharply than necessary, "I think we'll manage Ruth Ann." She had nodded once and left. I had not thought of that until Marian's voice placed the same sentence in the room. When I finally hung up, the house no longer felt like a place where things simply sat. It felt arranged. I stood and went into the den. That room had once belonged to joint quiet. Evelyn paid bills at the desk, while I read the paper in the armchair. On fall evenings, she would open the side window half an inch for the smell of leaves and insist the draft was freshness, not chill. After she died, I used the desk less because the sight of her little brass letter opener and the blotter with the faint ring from her teacup made it difficult to concentrate on utilities. Danny had started sitting in there when he stopped by, taking calls, checking insurance websites, printing forms from my email because it's easier if I just do it. I had been grateful, then mildly irritated, then resigned. Now, standing in the doorway, I felt something closer to trespass. The desk surface looked tidy in Danny's way, not Evelyn's. Stacks squared too sharply. Pen cup moved from left side to right. Mail arranged by size instead of urgency. The small yellow notepad by the phone held 3 pages of impressions where someone had written hard enough to scar the paper underneath. I sat down and angled the top page toward the light. On the first visible sheet were numbers. Appointment time. Lab code, maybe. Nothing useful. I flipped it over and caught the pressure impressions from the page beneath. You can read indentations if you tilt paper right. Evelyn taught me that years ago when Danny at 12 lied about not knowing who had called long distance from the wall phone. I held the pad under the lamp and turned it slowly. In the grooves, I could make out words. Light-headed in mornings mist does, non-compliant with low sodium. Daughter concerned confusion. Worse afternoon, I stared so long my eyes watered. Daughter concerned. Leah lived in Cincinnati. She had not been here afternoon in months. Confusion worse afternoon was not a phrase anyone who knew me would use. It was clinical, but not professionally clinical. Personal, but not intimate. Language from someone who had spent enough time in offices to mimic them. My chest tightened in a way that made me press a fist against it until the ache eased. I turned more pages. Another indentation. Refill mismatch, maybe due to Dad, doubling monitor fatigue post-dose. Keep Thursday appointment. Keep Thursday appointment. I set the pad down carefully as if sudden motion might somehow erase the grooves. The den lamp cast a yellow pool over the desk and left the corners of the room dim. There, on the shelf beside the printer, sat a file box Danny had bought after Christmas and labeled in black marker, Home/Medical/Tax. I had thought then that it looked like something from an office supply catalog, too clean to belong in this house. Now it made the room feel rented. I opened the top drawer of the desk and found 3 doctor summaries paper-clipped together, all already hole-punched, as if meant to be filed by someone other than the patient. The first was from January. Stress test follow-up. Reported episodes of fatigue and sporadic afternoon confusion. Encouraged family monitoring of compliance. I read that twice. Afternoon confusion. Family monitoring. I had told Dr. Patel I was tired. I had told him winter got to me worse since Evelyn died. I had not told him I was confused. If he had written it from observation, then my own body had become less legible to me than to others. If he had written it because someone else told him, then my body was being translated in rooms where I was not present or not primary. Both possibilities felt obscene. I carried the summaries back to the kitchen and laid them beside the envelope. The table had begun to look like the house had been trying to speak under its breath for months, and I had finally leaned close enough to hear it. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Leah. For a second, I simply watched her name on the screen. Then I answered. Hi, Dad. Her voice carried the cautious brightness adult daughters use when approaching older fathers who might be lonely, annoyed, or both. Hello, Leah. You sound funny. Are you all right? No, I said. She fell silent. Rain moved on the roof in a harder wave, then softened. What happened? She asked. I need you to answer a question plainly. Okay. Did your mother ever say anything to you about Danny picking up my medication? That landed. I could hear it. When Leah was young and had broken something in the kitchen or said something unkind to Mike, she always went silent before choosing her version. The silence on the line now was her at 46 and 10 years old at once. Why are you asking me that? She said carefully. Because I asked. That's not an answer. No, I said it isn't. Another silence. Then the tiny metal sound of her wedding ring touching because she twisted it against the phone when nervous. I knew that sound from 1,000 family dinners. Dad, she said, her voice lower. Now, did something happen today? Yes. Did you talk to Marion? I sat down slowly. How do you know that name belongs in this conversation? Leah breathed in. Let it out. Because Mom told me once that if anything ever felt wrong about your refills, Marion would know what she meant. Something passed through me then that was not shock, exactly. Something heavier, more humiliating. The realization that there had been a corridor of concern running around me inside my own family, and I had mistaken its walls for love. "What did she tell you?" I asked. Leah did not answer right away. "I'm not saying this on the phone," she said. "Then come over. I'm in Mason, Dad." "That's an hour and a half. It's rush hour. I am 72 years old. Leah and I have just spent the afternoon discovering that my dead wife and my daughter may have been having private conversations about my medication that did not include me. So, unless traffic has become a moral principle in the last 10 minutes, you can get in your car." She inhaled sharply. I almost apologized. Then I didn't. That too told me something about the day. "All right," she said. "I'll come." She arrived just after 7 with wet hair curling at her collar and a face already arranged for damage control. Leah has Evelyn's coloring, but not her center. Same soft brown hair, same small square jaw. Same mouth that looked generous until tightened by worry. She set her umbrella by the mudroom bench and stood in the kitchen doorway, taking in the table before looking at me. "Oh," she said softly. The envelope lay open. Receipts were spread in months. The freezer container, labeled post-appointment, sat by the salt cellar. The doctor's summaries I found in the den were stacked beside the yellow notepad. Whatever comfort the room once offered had been replaced by the unmistakable feel of a place where people had begun telling the truth late. "You've been busy," she said. "I've been blind." She flinched a little at that. I made coffee because making coffee is how Americans keep themselves from becoming animals at the wrong moment. Leah took off her raincoat and sat where Evelyn used to sit at the short end of the table nearest the sink. I stood at the counter, longer than necessary, measuring grounds. Listening to the machine fill, smelling the raw, dark rise of coffee waking under hot water. The ordinary sound of it made me want to weep, which annoyed me enough that I did not. When I sat down opposite her, she looked at the envelope first, then at me. "What did Marion tell you, that your mother knew someone was poisoning me?" Leah shut her eyes. I said, "Was that news to you?" "No." The word came small. I leaned back in my chair and looked at the ceiling for one long second. There are moments when anger would be a relief because it is active. What I felt instead was a hollowing, as if whole sections of my marriage had been occupied territory and I had been moving through them speaking about weather. "You knew," I said. "I suspected what Mom suspected. What is the difference?" "A lot, sometimes. Not to the person left out of it." She took both hands around her mug, though she had not sipped yet. "Mom never said Danny was poisoning you. Not in those words." "Then what words?" "She said he had started handling things in a way that made her uneasy." "Handling." I laughed once without humor. Everybody's very fond of that word. Her eyes filled. She blinked it back hard. "She said he was too involved with pickups and scheduling and calls," Leah said. "She said he answered questions nobody had asked him yet. She said he always got to the room first." The phrase made me look up. "What room?" "Any room, Dad. Doctor's rooms, kitchen conversations, front hallway when people dropped by. He got there first, and he stayed there until everything sounded like it came through him. I remembered Danny at 16 stepping in front of Mike when the two of them were arguing in the garage, not to break it up, but to control where it happened. I remembered him in his 20s, leaning against door frames during adult conversations as if placement itself were influence. I remembered praising him more than once for being the one who shows up. Memory was turning against me now in batches. "Why didn't she tell me?" I said. Leah looked at me for a long moment. "You want the kind answer, or the true one, unless we've all finally given that up for Lent." She winced again at my tone, but held the line. "She thought you'd defend him," she said. I stared at her. "She thought you'd call it fussing," Leah went on, "or tell her she was reading too much into it, or say Danny was only helping because Mike was gone and I had my own life and she was sick and you were tired. I could not speak, because she was right. Not exactly in every detail, maybe, but in the shape of it. I had spent years choosing peace over friction in matters I considered domestic. That had been Evelyn's terrain, I told myself. She saw subtleties I didn't. She worried in practical ways. She noticed currents. My own passivity had masqueraded as trust in her competence. How easy it is for a man to call his absence respect when the woman beside him is strong enough to carry the burden of noticing. Leah reached into her purse and pulled out her phone. She left me a voicemail, she said. My heart thudded once hard. Went about 2 years ago. Maybe a little more. She swallowed. I didn't think it mattered enough. Then after she died, I couldn't make myself delete it. I looked at the phone and felt absurdly a flare of jealousy toward a device because it had held something my wife had not given me. What did she say? Leah's thumb trembled once over the screen. Not much, but enough that I called her back. Did you save that call too, no? A beat. I wish I had. She set the phone on the table between the receipts and the coffee mugs. In the overhead light, the black screen reflected our faces faintly over the spread paper. My own looked older than it had that morning. Not because of the years, because of arrangement. Some structures hold until one sentence, one slip, one remembered look, and then the whole face of your life begins moving things around. Before I play it, Leah said there's something else. I waited. Mom asked me once to come over in the middle of the day when Danny thought you'd be at physical therapy. I frowned. Physical therapy. You were doing those balance sessions after you fell in the garage, remember? I remembered. Not the fall so much as the embarrassment afterward, the way Danny had insisted on driving me for the first 3 sessions just to be safe. She wanted me to help her sort the kitchen drawer. Drawer in the medical papers, Leah said. At the time, I thought she was making busy work because she was scared of treatment, but when I got here, she had already separated some of the pharmacy slips from the others. She kept asking whether I thought it was awful to ask a store not to release things through family. The room blurred slightly at the edges. What did you tell her? I said it depended on the family. I laughed again, that bad little laugh with no humor in it. Very wise. She said, I'm trying not to accuse anyone of anything. I'm trying to slow down a pattern. Leah's voice thickened. I didn't understand what she meant, or maybe I didn't want to. That hurt for the simple reason that it sounded like Evelyn. Not dramatic, not grand. Slow down a pattern. She would have phrased it exactly that way, as if danger could be negotiated through process because naming it outright would tear too much fabric. The clock over the stove clicked once into the next minute. I looked toward the den. Its half-open doorway seemed darker than it ought to have been with the lamp off. The yellow pad I'd brought from the desk lay near the edge of the table. The words in the impressions rose again in my mind. Non-compliant. Daughter concerned. Confusion worse afternoon. Did you ever tell anyone I was confused in the afternoons? I asked. Leah's head jerked up. What did you? No. I turned the notepad toward her and pointed to the impression. She leaned over it, brows pinched, and for the first time since arriving, she looked genuinely frightened. I never said that. I know. She read the line again. Dad. That single word held more terror than pity now. Better, I thought bitterly. Terror at least implies the truth is larger than courtesy. I said, he's not just handling prescriptions. Leah looked around the room, then slowly in the way people do when they suddenly understand a place has been part of the mechanism. Calendar, sideboard, den, mudroom, refrigerator. Her gaze landed on the wall calendar in Danny's black marker. He wrote on Mom's calendar, she said almost to herself. Yes, he never used to do that. No, she hated black marker. I know, that cost me too. A tiny thing. Ink color. Nothing that would matter in a court or chart or police report. But grief in houses is built from precisely such things. She hated black marker because it bled through the paper and made the next month look bruised. I had forgotten that, or remembered it without letting it accuse the present. Leah touched the edge of one folded receipt. "You always sided with him because he was here," she said quietly. I looked up. "I'm not saying you loved him more," she added. "I'm saying he accounted too much." My first instinct was defense. My second was shame. The third, which arrived after both, was the slow, horrible understanding that she was not speaking only about Danny. Mike. Mike with his distance and sharpness and his long pauses on the phone after Evelyn died. Mike, whose visits had shortened over the years because every visit turned into some friction with Danny about thermostats or money, or who had spoken to which specialist. Mike, whom I had privately described as not easy for so long I had begun to hear difficulty in his breathing. Mike, who when Evelyn was in treatment once stood in this very kitchen and said, "You know he treats access like property, right?" And I had answered, "That's enough." I had been angry then. Protective of family peace. Protective maybe of the son who made himself useful in ways I recognized. Mike had left 2 hours early the next morning. I had told myself he was cold. Leah looked at the phone again. "Do you want to hear it?" I could not answer at first, not because I did not want to, because I had begun to understand that hearing my wife's voice now would not be comfort. It would be evidence. "Yes," I said. Leah touched the screen. The kitchen held still around us. The rain had eased, leaving only drip sounds at the eaves and the occasional passing car on wet pavement out front. Somewhere a dog barked twice. The refrigerator motor cut off. Then there was the tiny click of an old voicemail opening. Static first, the hollow cellular hush of years ago. Then, Evelyn. "Leah, honey, call me when you can." Her voice came into the room so naturally my body reacted before my mind did. For one impossible second I expected to look up and see her by the sink in her green cardigan with one hand tucked under her elbow the way she stood when tired. The pitch of her voice was slightly thinner than before chemo, but it was hers. Warm, controlled, carrying effort under ordinary words. "I may be overthinking this," she said on the message, and I shut my eyes because of course she began that way. Apologizing in advance for her own perception. "But if you happen to speak to Marion Bell before I do, tell her not to let him pick it up unless I call first." A pause. Tiny, static breath. "She'll know what I mean." Another pause, longer this time. Then quieter. "Just tell her that. Don't make a story out of it." The message ended. That was all. Leah looked at me across the dark phone screen. I was aware of my own heartbeat again, heavy and slow and not entirely cooperative. For a while, neither of us moved. Then I said, "Him." "Yes." She didn't say Danny. No, she didn't have to. No. I stood up too fast and the room tipped. I caught the chair back before it could scrape. Leah rose halfway. "Dad, I'm fine." I wasn't. The word "fine" had become a bad family prayer, the kind people say to keep roofs on. I went to the sink and put both hands on the counter. The porcelain felt cool under my palms. Outside, a drop fell from the roof to the stone bird bath below with the same spaced plink over and over. Inside the kitchen, every object now had two histories, the one I had lived and the one I had failed to read. Not a single administrative error, not a confused old man misremembering a refill, not my wife merely fussing, a pattern. She'll know what I mean. Don't make a story out of it. Which meant she had been trying to contain something already dangerous enough to require containment. Not solve it, not expose it, slow it, manage the perimeter, keep peace in the house while fearing the house's own channels. I pressed one hand over my mouth. Because at last, fully horribly, another truth came with it, the one that collapsed everything I had spent the day trying to preserve. Evelyn had not left me out because she did not know how to tell me. She left me out because she believed I would protect Danny before I protected the truth. For a long time after the voicemail ended, neither Leah nor I spoke. The kitchen had gone so still I could hear the faint electric tick in the clock over the stove and the soft, intermittent drip from my raincoat drying on the mudroom hook. Evelyn's voice seemed to remain in the room after the phone screen had gone dark, not in any ghostly way, just in the ordinary, brutal way voices do when the person is gone and the words refuse to be. "Don't let him pick it up unless I call first. She'll know what I mean. Don't make a story out of it." I stayed at the sink because if I sat down again, I was not entirely sure I would get back up with my shape still intact. My hands were spread flat on the counter, the old laminate edge pressed into the heels of my palms. I stared at the window over the sink and saw my own outline reflected against the night yard. Shoulders, bent kitchen lights behind me, the house holding my shape the way it had held hers in that exact spot for years. Leah said my name once. Quietly. I did not turn. "Dad." I heard it. I know. I laughed a little once. Not because there was anything funny in the room, because men my age sometimes laugh when the alternative would sound too much like pain. I said, "That was not the voice of a woman fussing. No, that was not the voice of a woman imagining things. No, that was the voice of a woman choosing her words because she knew exactly how dangerous they were." When I turned around, Leah was crying in the restrained, furious way Evelyn used to cry when she was too angry to let herself fall apart. Tears on her face-mouth, held tight back straight in the chair as if posture itself could keep her from breaking. "I should have come sooner," she said. "Yes," I said. "It was cruel. It was also true." She flinched. I did not take it back. There are times in a family when kindness becomes one more form of delay. Leah wiped under one eye with the heel of her hand and looked at the spread on the table, the envelope, the slips, the doctor's summaries from the den, the yellow notepad with its bruised paper impressions, the freezer container marked post-appointment. Then she looked toward the den itself, its doorway dark beyond the kitchen light. "I always hated that room after Mom got sick," she said. I followed her gaze. "Why?" "Because Danny started sitting in there like a receptionist." She gave a shaky breath that almost turned into a laugh and didn't. "That sounds petty." It doesn't. He'd answer the house phone from that room before it finished the second ring. He'd tell people she was resting before they asked to speak to her. He'd write things down and then summarize them in that calm little voice like he was saving everybody time. The image came back to me so vividly, I felt my neck tighten. Danny at the desk with one forearm braced near the blotter phone, crooked against his ear, pen moving. The way I had once looked at that and thought, what a blessing the boy is taking pressure off his mother. Evelyn would pass the doorway, see him there, and the line between her brows would deepen just slightly. I had read that line as worry about bills, chemo, fatigue, all the ordinary burdens of illness. Maybe sometimes it had been. Maybe not all the time. Leah reached for one of the older folded receipts and turned it over between her fingers. Mike saw it sooner than I did. I looked at her sharply. Saw what? The control. Maybe not all of it, but the pattern. I sat back down slowly. When? Around the second year of Mom's treatment. Maybe earlier. Leah pushed hair behind one ear. He called me after a visit and said Danny was acting like he owned the house because he handled the practical stuff. I told him he was being dramatic. That sounds like Mike. Yes. She gave me a level look. And you sounded a lot like him when you told me an hour ago to get in the car. I let that sit. Did he say anything to your mother? I asked. Yes. I closed my eyes. There it was again. Another corridor of truth I had not been allowed into, or more honestly, had not been considered safe for. When one Sunday afternoon, you were outside with the gutter ladder. Leah looked down at the table. I only know because Mom called me afterward and said, your brother is not wrong, but he is late and loud, which makes him easy to dismiss. That line was so precisely Evelyn I could have heard her say it from the pantry. What did Mike think Danny was doing? Managing too much. Speaking for you too easily. making Mom ask permission inside her own systems. I looked at the envelope. Brown leather softened with years of handling. Ordinary enough to have sat under my hand for decades without ever drawing notice. I thought of all the other ordinary things in the house I had lived beside without asking what power they carried. The side door key, the wall calendar, the yellow notepad, freezer tape, opened mail tucked behind manuals. A house does not become hostile with knives or thunder. It becomes hostile when its daily pathways stop being neutral. Leah rose and came around the table to stand beside me. She put one hand lightly on my shoulder, then seemed to think better of it and pulled back. "What are you going to do?" she asked. I looked at the papers, at Evelyn's handwriting, at the dark doorway to the den, at the refrigerator where Danny's black marker circles bruised the month ahead. For the first time since Marion spoke, the question did not turn into panic. "I'm going to find out how much room he took," I said. Leah stayed another hour. We went through the envelope together, and her presence in the kitchen changed the work in a way that hurt. She knew Evelyn's folding habits better than I did in some respects. "This one's ordinary," she would say, flattening a receipt with her palm. This one bothered her. She showed me how Evelyn underlined dates when a sequence mattered and circled only when the date itself was the problem. We found 3 more slips marked that way across 8 months. 2 attached to my blood pressure medication, 1 attached to a mild sedative doctor. Patel had prescribed for occasional sleep after Evelyn died, and that I remembered taking perhaps half a dozen times total. Yet the pickup record in the envelope suggested more refills than I remembered ever opening. That discovery did not feel cinematic. It felt obscene in a domestic way, the thought of another person managing not only my blood pressure, but my sleep, my fatigue. The story of whether I was a little foggy or deeply confused turned the kitchen air mean in my lungs. Leah left a little after 9. At the door, she hesitated and said, "You should call Mike." I almost said no on instinct. Pride, old habit, the desire not to widen the shame until I absolutely had to. Then I heard myself say, "I will." After she drove off, I stood in the mudroom with the side door open to the damp night and listened to the road. No traffic for a full minute. Then a single car somewhere far off. The porch light showed wet concrete the dark curve of the driveway. The bench where Evelyn used to set grocery bags to sort before bringing them in. The mudroom itself smelled like wet coat's old detergent and the mineral breath of rain dragged in on soles. I looked at the key hook where Danny's spare key no longer hung because he kept it with him for convenience, and I had the unpleasant sense that the threshold itself had become part of the crime. Every system had an entry point. I shut the door and, without talking myself out of it, slid the deadbolt. The click was louder than it had any right to be. I slept badly and woke before dawn with the conviction that somebody had been in the house. Not because I heard a break-in, because the silence felt wrong. I lay still staring at the dark ceiling listening. The refrigerator hummed faintly through the wall. Pipes gave a little settling knock. Wind moved one bare branch against the gutter outside. Nothing else. Yet the feeling persisted with such force that I got up in my undershirt and socks and walked room to room in the half-light before sunrise, checking doors, checking the den, checking the kitchen table where I had left the envelope and the slips stacked by month under the yellow notepad. Everything was where I had left it. That should have reassured me. It didn't, because now I understood that if someone had been controlling the house for months, maybe years, he had not needed to do it at night. He had done it in daylight with groceries in his arms and concern in his voice. I made coffee and called Mike at 6:20. He answered on the 4th ring, sounding half awake and already irritated. "Somebody better be dead." "It's your father." A beat, then the rustle of sheets and his voice sharpening. "What happened? I need you to come home." Silence. Mike does not waste words when afraid. That is one of the reasons people who don't know him well mistake him for cold. He saves speech for impact. I heard him sit up. "Why?" "Because Leah came last night. Because Marion Bell said your mother knew Danny was poisoning me. Nothing on the line for 2 full seconds. Then, Jesus Christ, I also found records, receipts, doctor summaries in the den, notes written in somebody else's language about me being confused. You found them where? In the house. Dad. Will you come? I'm getting dressed. He lived outside Dayton now in a narrow brick house with a wife he'd divorced 3 years earlier and a grown daughter in nursing school who called me more faithfully than he did. He had moved for work 15 years ago and then stayed because not staying had become easier than returning to the old shape of us. He arrived just after 9:30 in a gray sedan that always looked too clean for Ohio. I saw him from the kitchen window getting out in the driveway, one hand on the roof, a moment before he straightened as if bracing himself for impact. He looked older than the last time I'd seen him in July. More gray at the temples. Same long frame, same heavy brow. Same mouth that could look harsh until it softened, which it rarely did on purpose. He came in through the front door instead of the side. That choice landed in me harder than I expected. When he stepped into the kitchen and saw the table, he stopped. No greeting first, no embrace, just the stop. That bad, he said. Yes. He crossed slowly, looking not only at the papers, but at the room. Calendar. Den doorway, the sideboard, the mudroom bench. It struck me then that Mike was doing what I had only just begun learning to do, reading space for authorship. I said, "Coffee." He nodded. Sat down. Not at his mother's place, not at mine, but on the long side facing the window. He picked up one of the folded receipts, opened it, looked at the date, and then at the next, without asking permission. That irritated me for half a second. Then I recognized the reflex for what it was. He had been waiting years to be let inside this conversation. I told him everything, starting with the open doctor summary and ending with Evelyn's voicemail on Leah's phone. He interrupted only twice, once to ask what exact language Marion had used, once to ask whether Danny knew I had gone to Bell's. When I repeated Danny's line about confusion over the dosage adjustment, Mike leaned back in his chair and stared at the ceiling exactly as I had the night before. He's getting ahead of the explanation, he said. That's what I thought. Of course it is. I looked at him. You sound unsurprised. He lowered his gaze to me again. I'm surprised it took him this far. That stung. Meaning what? Meaning he's always been like this, Dad. Mike laid the receipt flat. Not murderous. Territorial. That's not the same thing. No, but one grows nicely inside the other if nobody stops it. My first instinct was to tell him not to talk about his brother that way in this house. The sentence rose almost complete in my throat before I killed it. That too told me something. Instead, I said, "What did you see?" Mike was quiet a moment. Then he said, "Do you want what I saw or what I can prove?" "What you saw." He rubbed one thumb over the edge of the receipt. He learned early that being useful bought him forgiveness. You and Mom praised him for showing up, carrying things, remembering schedules. He liked that. Then Mom got sick and there were more schedules and more carrying and more chances to be the person standing nearest the need. After a while, if somebody else tried to help, he treated it like interference. That's a family complaint, not a crime. No, Mike said. It's the engine. He stood and went into the den without asking, which again would once have annoyed me. Now I followed him. Morning light flattened across the desk. The yellow pad sat where I had left it on the kitchen table. But the file box remained here, its labels in Danny's thick marker. Mike opened the lid, flipped through folders, and gave a short, humorless breath through his nose. Jesus. What? He's building categories around you. I came closer. Inside home/medical/tax were hanging files labeled utilities, insurance, appointments, refill balance notes, meals. Meals. My skin tightened. Mike pulled one file halfway out and showed me. Printed pages from internet articles about sodium intake dizziness in older adults, medication, compliance in widowers, home fall prevention. The kind of material any concerned family member could collect, which is precisely why it was so chilling. Care can camouflage itself indefinitely when it uses the right fonts. At the back of the same file was a page torn from a legal pad in Danny's writing core. Paddle. If afternoon's worse, move Thursday earlier. Ruth Ann, stop-in's not good. Leah upsets Mom. I reached for the edge of the drawer to steady myself. He wrote that. Here, I said. Yes. In my house. Yes. The last word came hard, and Mike looked at me with something like pity stripped of softness. Dad, he said he's been using your house as the place where his version becomes official. We stood in that room breathing the same stale den air, the faint smell of printer ink and dust, and the cedar sachet Evelyn once tucked in the desk drawer, well, because she said paperwork ought not smell dead. I remembered then, a Tuesday afternoon, maybe 18 months before Evelyn died, when I came in from mowing and found Danny in this room with the door mostly closed, talking low on the phone. He ended the call too quickly when he heard me and said it was the pharmacy. No big deal, just straightening out refill timing. Evelyn from the hall said I asked that you leave that to me. Danny laughed and said I'm helping. I remembered smiling at the whole exchange because the idea of my wife and son mildly bickering over who got to manage my blood pressure pills had seemed almost comically domestic. I had been a fool in a house full of instructions. What exactly did you say to your mother? I asked Mike. He shut the file box and looked at me. A year before she died, he said I told her Danny was making himself gatekeeper. I said he was treating errands like authority. I said every time I came home, he acted like I was stepping into a system already running without me. What did she say? She said she was trying to keep peace until treatment was over. There it was again. Peace, always peace. The most expensive word in families like ours. And then I said keeping peace was how people like him got bigger. I looked away. Mike went on more quietly now. She told me not to come in hot because you'd side with him out of reflex. The room seemed to narrow around my ribs. Did she say that? Yes. My shame by then had become strangely clarifying, like cold water. There is no point in defending yourself once the structure of your blindness is visible from multiple angles. You can only decide whether to keep pretending you do not see it. I said, "What else?" He studied me a moment, perhaps deciding whether I had earned the next truth. Then he said, "She also said if anything ever happened to her first, he'd try to run you through the house." I felt my face change. Mike's eyes held mine. He did not soften the blow. She said he would never come at you directly because that would make him easy to name. She said he'd do it through routines, food, calls, timing, making himself the most convenient route. My knees weakened just enough that I sat in Evelyn's old bill-paying chair before I intended to. The cushion had thinned under the left hip years ago, and even that familiar dip hurt now because it put me in the shape of her work. A car door slammed outside. Both Mike and I went still. Then we heard the side door knob rattle. Once. Then again. Harder. The deadbolt held. My pulse jumped so hard I could hear it in my ears. Danny had a key. Of course he had a key. He kept it on the black carabiner in his pocket. Which meant the rattle was not because he could not unlock the door. It was because I had left the chain slid on after bolting without consciously noticing I'd done it when Mike arrived through the front. The knob rattled again, then a knuckle hit the door twice. Dad Mike's head turned toward me. In that one look, we understood the same thing at once. If Danny found us in the den over his files, the room would belong to him again in one sentence unless we were ready. I stood, quietly. Mike moved faster than I would have expected for a man his age and size, closing the file box and setting it exactly where it had been. I took the loose sheet in Danny's handwriting and slid it into my shirt pocket before I fully chose to. Then I picked up the desk lamp switch cord and let it swing to a stop so I would remember whether anything had been touched later. Ridiculous detail. Necessary detail. Dad. Danny called again, louder now, a smile in his voice already slipping toward concern. Doors jammed. I stepped into the kitchen and called, "Coming." My own voice sounded steady. That steadiness gave me the first small taste of something I had not felt yet in this business control. I opened the mudroom door but left the chain on until I saw his face through the gap. Danny stood in the wet morning, holding a cardboard tray with 2 coffees and a white bakery bag. He wore his work fleece again, navy this time, and his expression when he saw the chain was worth the entire discomfort of the moment. Not rage. Worse. Surprise offended into politeness. "You got the chain on," he said. "Yes." He gave a little laugh. "What for?" It was early. He lifted the coffee tray slightly, brought breakfast. For one strange second, seeing the coffees there in his hands almost broke me, because for years that gesture would have been enough. 2 coffees, a bag from the bakery, a son who remembered how his father took cream. Love does not stop looking like itself just because it has been corrupted. I took the tray from him, through the gap, then the bakery bag. "Thanks," I said. He waited. I did not unhook the chain. His smile thinned almost invisibly. "You gonna let me in Mike's here?" Something changed behind his eyes. Not much. A small internal adjustment. He had not expected that variable. "Oh," he said. "Well, good." He let the words sit there as if he had no objection at all to this coincidence. Then just as mildly I should come in then. "Save us all a phone call." "No," I said. The rain from the roof ticked onto the step beside him. He glanced past me through the narrow opening toward the kitchen, reading what he could of the room. His gaze snagged briefly on the table where I had stacked the slips under the yellow pad. Not enough exposed to tell him much. I hoped. "Everything okay?" he asked. "Yes. You sound weird. I didn't sleep much. Because of what Marion said." There it was. Direct now, smooth, offered as concern. I said, "I'll call you later." He did not move. "Dad," he said quietly, "if you're upset, don't let Mike wind you up. He doesn't understand the day-to-day." Mike appeared then in the doorway behind me. He had that talent for entering silence without apology, and when he came to stand where Danny could see him, the mudroom seemed to shrink 2 sizes. "Morning," Mike said. Danny's eyes flicked to him and back to me. "You called him before me." It was not a question about sequence. It was a question about allegiance. "Yes," I said. Danny gave the smallest nod. Then he smiled again, and in that smile was something I had been too sentimental to see for years. Not warmth. Calculation choosing charm because force would lose. "Okay," he said. "Then you boys talk. But you need to call me before you start making assumptions off half information. We've already had issues with compliance, and if this turns into one of Mike's little performance pieces, it won't help you." Compliance. Performance pieces. You boys. Every phrase chosen to reposition the room without sounding like control. Mike said, "Go to work, Danny." Danny did not look at him. He kept his eyes on me. "Dad," I said. "Later." He stood another second, then tipped his chin once turned and walked back down the step to his truck. His shoulders were relaxed, his pace unhurried. Nothing in him broadcast alarm. That frightened me more than if he had banged the door. Mike watched until the truck backed out. Then he said, "Now you know." I set the coffees on the counter untouched. "Know what? He doesn't need to shout. He just needs the room." By noon, I had 3 more confirmations and lost another piece of my former life. The first came from Dr. Patel's office. I called myself from the kitchen wall phone, not the cell, and asked for copies of all visit summaries and phone notes related to medication dizziness or reported confusion for the last year. The receptionist, a woman named Carla, whose voice I recognized from years of appointments, hesitated when I requested the phone notes. "We can print your visit summaries? No problem." "Mr. Mercer," she said. "The phone record may need nurse review." "Fine." "Do you need someone to go over them with your son?" "No." Another tiny pause. "All right. Has my son been going over them with you? I can't discuss." You can discuss my own file with me. Carla recovered quickly. There are several family contacts listed. I'm asking if anyone has been calling to report symptoms on my behalf. The line hummed. Mr. Mercer, she said carefully. There have been calls from family expressing concerns related to medication adherence and periods of confusion. If you'd like to update authorized communications, we can do that at your next visit. At your next visit. As if this were clerical. Print everything I said. When I hung up, Mike was standing at the sink rinsing one of the coffee cups Danny had brought, and neither of us commented on the fact that he had chosen the cup but not drunk from it. I told him what Carla said. He nodded once, jaw tight. Which family? Want to guess? He leaned both hands on the sink and looked out into the side yard. Dad. He said if he's been building a record of you as unsteady. This gets bigger than medicine. I knew that. Hearing it aloud made the room colder anyway. The second confirmation came from Ruth Ann Holcomb at 1:15 in the afternoon, carrying a covered dish because old neighborhood women do not come empty-handed even when truth is the real delivery. I had called her after Mike reminded me of Marion's repeated phrase and of Ruth Ann using nearly the same words after the funeral. She said she could stop by after lunch. When I saw her small silver sedan pull into the driveway, I felt the absurd embarrassment of a man whose neighbors may have watched his life being managed before he did. Ruth Ann came in through the front door without waiting to be told, dish in both hands, sensible shoes leaving wet half-moons on the mat. She was 67, narrow-shouldered, still handsome in the severe way some women become after enough years of not pretending with fools. She kissed my cheek, nodded to Mike, and looked around the kitchen once the way women do when entering a house they know too well to admire. You look terrible, she said to me. Thank you. You always were teachable late. Mike almost smiled. Ruth Ann set the dish on the counter and took the chair nearest the mudroom. Her gaze fell on the papers, rose to my face, then moved to the locked side door. Her expression changed by a fraction. So, she said, you finally noticed the side door. I sat down slowly. Meaning what? She folded her hands. Meaning Danny started using that door like a checkpoint 2 years ago. The sentence struck with the force of perfect plainness. What do you mean, checkpoint? I mean, if I came by with soup or mail or tomatoes from the garden, he somehow managed to be there before I was properly in the kitchen. I mean, he told me more than once you were resting and shouldn't be stirred up. I mean, last summer he asked me not to drop in unannounced because you were having bad confusion days and could get embarrassed. Mike said nothing. Ruth Ann did not look at him. Her attention stayed on me because she understood whose shame mattered in this room. I never asked him to say that. I know you didn't. She tipped her head slightly. That's why I'm here instead of pretending I didn't hear it. I stared at the side door. White paint, brass knob, narrow window with the faint fogging around the seal we had meant to replace for 3 winters and never did. Ordinary enough to have held casseroles, muddy cleats, school permission slips, and 50,000 comings and goings. Ordinary enough to have become a border post. When did he say confusion days, I asked. More than once. Once to me. Once to Janice Fullerton when she came with church directories. Once to the UPS driver, for God's sake, like he was explaining why the package needed signing through him. The room shifted again. Not because I had never heard that phrase before, but because every new witness moved the story from suspicion into structure. Ruth Ann reached into her purse and pulled out her reading glasses, though she did not put them on. She rolled them in her fingers instead. Your wife knew something was off, she said. Yes, she told me one afternoon standing right there by that door. Not every kind of help is safe when it starts choosing who gets through. I thought she meant grief and casseroles and people wearing her out. Maybe partly she did. But she was watching him. She should have said so. Ruth Ann looked at me hard. Would you have heard her? No one spoke after that. The third confirmation came at 3:40 from Dr. Patel himself. He called my cell, which almost sent me into a rage on principle because he had had my wall number for 20 years. Mike answered when he saw the name and handed the phone to me without a word. Tom Patel said. His voice carried that careful physician calm I have always appreciated in him and distrusted by about 10%. Carla said you wanted the notes. Yes. She also said you sounded upset. I am upset. A pause. All right. I went to the den for privacy, then stopped in the doorway and turned back into the kitchen. No, not the den. I took the call standing by the sink instead. I need to know, I said, who has been describing me as confused. Patel breathed out once. There have been concerns raised by family members about fatigue, dizziness, and some periods of what they characterized as disorganization. What family members? I'm not going to mediate family conflict over the phone. This is not conflict. This is my chart. Another pause. Then carefully, most often your younger son. The side yard beyond the sink window went blurred for a second. And have you seen confusion in me? I've seen grief, disrupted sleep, blood pressure, variability, some fatigue. I've also seen you arrive to appointments with a family narrative already in the room. The phrasing was so exact, so dryly clinical that I went cold all over. What does that mean? It means Patel said, and now his tone changed from physician cautious to man precise, that sometimes before you answered a question, your son had already begun contextualizing it for me. I could not speak. I allowed too much of that, he said. That is on me. I assumed support. In retrospect, I should have separated your answers more clearly. I looked at the side door again. Rain had stopped. The concrete outside was drying in dark islands. Did he ever request dosage changes? He raised concerns. He did not direct treatment, but some refill questions and symptom reports came through from him. Did you ever tell him I was confused? No. Did you ever tell him there was a dosage adjustment, not ordered? No. Discussed as possible if symptoms continued. The room settled around that. That was enough. More than enough. I thanked him, though I did not feel like thanking anyone. When I hung up, Mike was waiting by the table, and he knew from my face before I said it. He confirmed it, I said. Not the poison, the pattern. Danny's been speaking first. Mike nodded once slowly, as if some old internal ledger had just received the final entry it needed. What now, he said. I looked at the table. The receipts, the envelope, the freezer labels, the summaries, the legal pad, the printed internet pages from the file box. Every piece by itself deniable. Together less and less so. What now, I repeated. And then with a steadiness that surprised even me, I said, now I stop waiting for the truth to present itself politely. We spent the rest of the afternoon building sequence. Not haphazardly, not in panic. That was the shift. I cleared the kitchen table entirely, even the placemat by the window, wiped it down, dried it. Then I emptied the leather envelope all the way for the first time, not only what sat on top, every receipt, every stapled bag strip, every consultation printout, the whole plain brown contents of the years Evelyn had been quietly marking. I sorted them by year first, then month, then medication. Mike took the doctor summaries and phone note printouts Carla had faxed to the UPS store for us and brought back in a manila envelope. We lined those beneath the corresponding months. Then the freezer container labels came next, peeled carefully from plastic lids and stuck to index cards Mike found in the desk. Then the yellow legal pad pages with their indented notes. Then the wall calendar squares copied onto notebook paper where Danny's black marker appointments and pickup notations fell. By 5 o'clock, the kitchen table looked less like grief storage than a prosecution without a courtroom. And there, in the middle of it, the leather envelope changed again. It was no longer simply Evelyn's object, no longer an ache, no longer even mainly evidence. It had become what she had tried to build, and I had refused to recognize a spine, a plain domestic backbone running through the months. March. Quiet. April. One circled refill. June. Sleep medication slip attached to a pickup time when Danny had brought dinner. August, Patel note mentioning family concern over fatigue. October, the hospital day refill I never saw. November, another slip folded into hard quarters. January, stress test follow-up with confusion language I never used. March again. Marion's circled dates. The pattern was not every week, not every month, not melodramatically neat. That made it more frightening. Real control rarely wastes itself on theater. It nudges, it accumulates, it builds a file of you that you did not author. At 6:10, while I was aligning January under the lamp, my cell buzzed with Danny's name. I did not answer. He called again, 3 minutes later. Then he texted, "Need to know what's going on before this gets out of hand." I showed Mike. He gave a thin smile with no pleasure in it. "That's not concern," he said. "That's territorial pressure." I knew that. Still, my hand shook a little when I set the phone face down. The most memorable moment of the day came just after dusk. And if I live another 10 years, I expect I will hear it in my sleep. Mike had gone to the garage to get another folding table because we had run out of room for the papers. I was alone in the kitchen standing over the receipts when I heard the soft metallic sound of the side door key entering the lock. Not knocking, not calling first. The key. Every part of me went alert. Then came the quiet twist of metal against resistance and the low, muttered sound a man makes when the lock does not yield the way he expected. Once. Then again. Then the knob turning harder. Then stillness. I did not move. The kitchen light was on. My shadow lay across the receipts. The side door was 3 feet to my left. Between me and it stood the mudroom threshold where Evelyn used to sort groceries, where Ruth Ann had delivered casseroles, where Danny had walked in 1,000 times without ceremony because I had made it ordinary. The knob turned one more time. Then Danny's voice low through the door, not calling my name now, just testing the air with a soft, "Huh." I could picture him exactly. Hand on the knob, shoulders relaxed, face unreadable, recalculating. My heart was beating so hard I felt it in my gums. I reached across the counter and picked up the old fireplace poker Evelyn kept by the back hall after the gas log stopped working, and we never bothered replacing the set. I did not do it because I meant to use it. I did it because for one clear instant I understood that the side door was no longer merely a side door. It was the line between his assumption and my refusal. Then Mike came in from the garage through the interior door, carrying the folding table over one shoulder, saw my face, followed my eyes to the mudroom, and went utterly still. The knob did not move again. A truck door slammed outside. Engine started. Tires rolled over wet gravel. Only when the sound had gone did I realize I had been holding my breath. Mike set the folding table down very gently. "He used the key," I said. "Yes." He didn't knock. "No." He expected to come in. Yes. We looked at each other across the kitchen, and in that moment, something finalized in me. Not panic, not even fear exactly. A moral line finding itself. I set the poker down and crossed to the side door. Checked the deadbolt. Then for the first time since Evelyn died, I reached up, slid the security chain fully into place and stood with my hand resting against the wood a moment longer than necessary. My voice, when I spoke, was steady. "He does not come in here again unless I open it." Mike said nothing. He did not need to. We worked until almost 9. At 7:30, Danny texted again. "I'm trying not to overreact, but if you're making decisions based on Mike's version of things, I need to correct some misunderstandings." Correct. Version. Need. Every word a small leash. I did not answer. At 8:08, Leah texted from home. "Do you want me there tomorrow?" I wrote back, "Yes." Then after a long moment, another message. "Bring the voicemail." She answered almost immediately, "I will." By then, the kitchen held 2 folding tables, one by the window and one extending into the space by the refrigerator. Receipts in dated stacks. Summaries paper-clipped by visit. Photographs Mike had taken on his phone of the freezer labels before we peeled them off. A handwritten list in my own fountain pen script of dates when Danny had brought meals, offered rides, handled refills, or called after appointments before I had even reached home. On the legal pad in the center of a blank page, I wrote one sentence and underlined it twice. He gets there first. Everything sat under that. By 9, my back ached and my eyes burned, but my mind had become cleaner than it had been in months. Painfully clean. I could see the family shape now in a way I had avoided seeing it all my adult life. Danny had been rewarded for access. Mike had been punished for distance even when the distance came from refusing Danny's terms. Leah had learned caution because speaking directly only made her look like the emotional child in a system run by the practical son. Evelyn had tried to regulate the damage inside the house because she knew if she named it too hard, I would defend the arrangement before I examined it. And God help me, I had let usefulness stand in for character because usefulness made my own life easier to inhabit. I stood at the sink and looked out at the dark yard while Mike stacked the doctor summaries back into order behind me. I owe you an apology, I said. He did not answer for a second. Then, for what part? The question was so dry it almost made me smile. Almost. For all the years I called you distant when what you were was unwilling. Mike set the papers down. When I turned, he was looking at me with a face I had once mistaken for hardness because I did not understand how much effort it took him not to show pain where it could be used. You don't owe me a speech tonight, he said. I owe you more than that. Yes, he said, but not tonight. That, too, was love, though not the kind that comforts quickly. At 9:20, I gathered the receipts back into year piles, but I did not return them to the envelope. Not yet. Instead, I set the envelope in the center of the table by itself and looked at it under the light. The leather had gone darker near the fold from Evelyn's thumb over time. One corner was nicked where Danny as a boy had once tried to pry the snap open with a butter knife because he was certain she kept emergency cash in it. She laughed and smacked his wrist and said, "No money, just consequences." He had grinned, then 12 years old, all teeth and harmlessness. Harmlessness is one of the most expensive stories families ever buy. The house around us had changed by degrees all day. Not into anything supernatural, into something worse, a place whose meaning had been administered. The den no longer looked like a room where my wife once paid bills and I read the paper. It looked like a command post. The refrigerator wall no longer held a family calendar. It held scheduling marks from a man building a case. The mudroom no longer smelled like groceries and wet shoes alone. It smelled like ingress. The side door no longer meant convenience. It meant custody. Mike went to make up the guest room and I stayed in the kitchen. At 10, I picked up my cell and called Danny. He answered on the second ring with no greeting, which told me he had been waiting. "Dad, you can come by tomorrow at 6. Silence. Then cautious. "Okay. Leah will be here." Another beat. "What's this about?" "We're going to talk in the kitchen." Why does that sound like an intervention? Because you are hearing it correctly. His breathing changed slightly. Not enough for anyone who did not know him. "Dad, if this is about Marion getting spun up and Mike deciding he finally gets to be the hero, it's tomorrow at 6. I hung up. I stood with the phone still in my hand, listening to the empty line, then set it down beside the envelope. What I had done was not clever. It was not grand. But it was deliberate, and its deliberateness mattered. For months, perhaps longer, Danny had owned sequence. He got there first. He named the concern first. He entered the room first. He framed the symptom first. This time I had set the hour. I went to the mudroom. The house was very quiet. Mike's footsteps overhead, once then stillness. Refrigerator hum. Wind at the eaves. The little settling sigh older houses make after everyone has chosen their floorboards for the night. The side door stood before me in its white paint brass knob dull under the ceiling light narrow window, reflecting only my own shape now. I reached into the blue crock by the bench, where spare keys, screws, dead batteries, and 2 old wheat pennies collected, and I took out the tiny brass key for the top deadbolt, the one I still used, and Danny did not, because the other key had been more convenient for him after Evelyn got sick. I turned the deadbolt once, testing it. Solid. Then I lifted the chain again, slid it all the way into its metal track, and listened to the hard, final sound it made. After that, I did one more thing. I took my phone from my pocket, found Danny's contact, and deleted the garage keypad code I had once texted him when Evelyn was too weak to answer the side door. Then I walked into the garage, crossed to the wall unit, and changed the code itself. When I came back into the mudroom, I locked the interior door to the garage, too. Only then did I understand the full shape of what the day had become. This was no longer a matter of whether my son had been too involved, too helpful, too loose with boundaries, too eager to manage. I was fortifying my own house against him, and when I stood there in the mudroom with the cool brass key still warm from my hand, I knew with perfect certainty that there was no way back to yesterday's version of my family. I stood in the mudroom a moment longer after changing the garage code, my hand still resting on the locked interior door, and listened to the quiet settle through the house. It did not feel like safety. That would have been too simple, too fast, too generous a thing for the night to give me. It felt instead like the silence after an incision, clean necessary and not yet healed. The sort of quiet you earn only after deciding that whatever was hiding inside the body could no longer be left where it was. When I went back into the kitchen, Mike was standing at the table looking down at the year piles of receipts and notes as if the room had become a battlefield map. "You all right?" he asked. "No," I said. He nodded once. "Good." I looked at him. He pulled out the chair nearest the sink and sat. "I don't mean that to sound cruel. I mean I'd trust you less if you were all right." There was no comfort in the sentence. That was one of the things about Mike that had wearied me when he was younger and steadied me now. He did not hurry to pad the truth with upholstery. I sat opposite him and looked at the envelope lying between us in the center of the table flat and emptied for the first time in years. It had always looked smaller in Evelyn's hands. Necessary, domestic, something to be shifted aside to reach the coupons or the tape. Now it looked like a small brown animal skinned of its harmlessness. "Tomorrow," I said. "Yes, he'll come in expecting to manage the tone." "Yes, and if I let him, we'll lose the room." Mike held my gaze. "Then don't." I almost smiled at that, not because it was funny, but because it was Mike's oldest talent, compressing an impossible emotional task into 5 plain words and handing it to you like a wrench. After he went upstairs, I stayed in the kitchen with the lamp over the sink on and the rest of the house in shadow. The light made a gold triangle on the counter where Evelyn used to stand and fold dish towels still warm from the dryer. Beyond that, the house receded into dimness. Front hall, den doorway, the line of the sideboard, the mudroom bench, and the white side door with the chain set and the deadbolt engaged. The familiar spaces no longer felt like places I moved through absent-mindedly. They felt like sentences waiting to be read correctly. I gathered the papers not into drawers or files, but into order. January through March on one side. Doctor notes clipped behind. The legal pad sheet with "He gets there first" written across the center. Ruth Ann's statement copied in my own hand because I wanted the words to live on paper from my body, not only memory. The photograph Mike had printed of Danny's filebox note, "Call Patel." If afternoon's worse, /move Thursday earlier, /Ruth Ann stop-ins, not good /Leah upsets mom. Marion's circled pickup records. The freezer label cards. The brown envelope itself. Then I wrote one more thing on a clean page from the yellow pad. Sequence is truth when memory has been managed. I set that on top and turned off the lamp. I did not sleep much, but when I woke, something in me had shifted from fear into discipline. Morning entered the house, hard and clear after days of rain. Pale March sun struck the side yard and lit every wet branch and bead of water left on the chain-link fence. I stood at the kitchen sink with coffee in one of Evelyn's blue-rimmed mugs and watched the light sharpen edges the storm had blurred. That, too, felt instructive. Mike came down at 7 in the same jeans he'd worn the day before and stood at the counter without speaking until I handed him a cup. He drank it black the way he had since college, grimly like medicine he had long ago stopped resenting. We did not talk much while the house woke around us. The furnace cycled, a truck went down the road. A cardinal hit the feeder pole outside and set it ringing softly. Leah arrived at 10 with her phone charger, a legal pad of her own, and a face set in the kind of composed determination I had once mistaken in her for softness. She hugged Mike awkwardly in the mudroom, kissed my cheek, and then stepped into the kitchen and stopped. The papers had changed the room overnight. What had been clutter the night before now looked deliberate. The kitchen table sat cleared except for the envelope and the date piles. The folding table extended from one end with the doctor notes, phone logs, and Marion's records. The second folding table near the refrigerator held the freezer label cards, printed summaries, and the copied statements in 3 neat rows. No casseroles, no placemats, no domestic camouflage, just sequence. Leah let out a slow breath. "All right," she said. At 11, Ruth Ann came by, in a navy coat and gloves, carrying no dish this time. That alone told me more about her seriousness than any speech would have. She stood by the sink and read through the copy of her statement, once amended 2 words, and then looked at me over her glasses. "If he says I misunderstood him," she said, "he's lying." "I know." "No." Her voice hardened. "You don't get to say that in the vague way men say it when they are still hoping not to know. I mean, I was not confused. He told me not to come by because you had bad confusion days and too many visitors made you agitated." I remember the exact way his mouth looked when he said agitated, like he enjoyed how reasonable it sounded. Leah turned away slightly. Mike didn't move at all. I held Ruth Ann's gaze and said, "All right." That seemed to satisfy her. At 1:30, Marion Bell called from the pharmacy to confirm she had faxed over a written summary of the pickup irregularities and the notations Evelyn had requested on the account. She told me she had also documented in writing and with date references that 2 of the refill events were inconsistent with how the dispensed medication should have presented if taken according to record. She did not use the word poisoning now. She did not need to. Her formality made the danger more real, not less. Just after 2, Dr. Patel's nurse emailed the last set of chart notes and phone message summaries. Mike printed them at the UPS store and brought them home. 3 calls from Danny across 6 months regarding dizziness. Afternoon confusion, missed doses, sodium concerns, sleep difficulties, and increasing trouble with sequencing. 1 note from Patel after a January visit. Son reports father increasingly forgetful about whether meds already taken. Advised family monitoring until next follow-up. Another will discuss adherence if pattern persists. I stared at the phrase whether meds already taken until the word stopped being English and turned into accusation. That line had not come from my mouth. It had entered my record by way of my son. That cost me something sharp and private, because there had been exactly 2 mornings after Evelyn died when I truly could not remember, not because of age or confusion, but because grief had separated the hour into blank pieces. I had told Danny about one of those mornings in a weak moment, standing right where the coffee grinder sat, and he had put his hand on my shoulder and said, "That's why it helps to let me keep an eye on things." I had taken it for compassion. Maybe some part of it had been. But in the chart, it became pattern, category, family concern. By 4 o'clock, the day had acquired the strange compressed calm that comes before a funeral or storm. The house itself seemed to know something decisive would happen in the kitchen. Sun slid lower and more yellow across the floor. Leah moved the basil pot from the sill because its dead stems cast bars across the papers. Ruth Ann sat in the den for 10 minutes without speaking, then came back out and said, "I never liked that room after your wife stopped using it." Mike went to the mudroom and stood at the side door looking out, not touching the lock. I knew what he was doing, measuring entry, thinking like a man who had once been held outside an emotional system so long that physical thresholds began to matter more than words. At 5:30, I called Carla at Dr. Patel's office one last time and asked her to note in my file immediately and in writing that no treatment decisions, symptom reports, or access discussions were to be conducted through Daniel Mercer. She asked if there had been a family conflict. I said, "There has been unauthorized narrative management of my care." She went quiet, then said she would document the restriction and alert the physician. Hearing my own sentence calmed me in a way I had not expected. Narrative management. There, named cleanly. At 5:45, I locked the front door. At 5:50, I checked the side door chain, the deadbolt, and the garage interior lock. Then I unhooked the chain and left only the deadbolt on the side door because I wanted him to knock. I wanted the room to begin with acknowledgement of threshold. At 6 exactly, Danny pulled into the driveway. We all heard it, the tires over the still damp gravel, the truck door, the pause while he stood outside orienting himself. He came to the side door first out of habit. When the knob did not turn, there was a beat of stillness. Then finally, 3 knuckles on wood. I crossed the mudroom and opened the door. Danny stood on the step in his dark jacket, clean-shaven hair, still damp from the shower, carrying nothing in his hands. No coffees, no bread bag, no groceries. That, too, was information. He had come prepared to use only himself. His eyes moved over my face first, then over my shoulder, taking in the line of sight into the kitchen. He could see the edge of the folding table, the backs of chairs, maybe Mike's outline by the window. His expression changed only by a fraction, but I knew that fraction now, the tiny recalculation before the charm set. "Evening," he said. "Come in." He stepped into the mudroom, wiped his shoes on the mat automatically, and then stopped as he saw the kitchen fully. Leah sat near the sink. Ruth Ann occupied the chair by the sideboard spine, straight hands folded over her purse. Mike stood with one hand resting on the back of the chair by the window. The papers lay in full view, not scattered, arranged. The room belonged to sequence now. Danny's gaze took it all in. Calendar, tables, receipts, envelope. The phone on the counter with Leah's charger attached. His face remained composed, but all the warmth left it. "What is this?" he asked. I went to the head of the table where Evelyn used to stand during Thanksgiving cleanup and took my place without sitting. "This," I said, "is the first time in a long while I have had the room before you." No one moved. Danny looked at me, then at Mike, then back to me. "If this is some kind of ambush, it is a chronology." He gave a short, incredulous laugh. "Dad, sit down." He did not. I had expected that. What I had not expected was how calm I felt once the sentence was out. Not numb, not hard, simply aligned. For months, perhaps years, he had used my embarrassment, my grief, my gratitude, and my love of peace to keep every conversation slanted toward his usefulness. Now that arrangement had ended, and the ending of it had a physical sensation, like standing up after sitting too long. "I'm not sitting for a family pile-on," Danny said. "It is not a pile-on," Leah said. Her voice shook only slightly. "It's evidence." He turned to her with a look of almost tender disbelief. "You too?" "No," she said. "Not too." "Finally." His gaze moved to Ruth Ann. "You called neighbors and Ruth Ann did not blink. You used neighbors, Daniel." "That's different." Mike said nothing. He didn't have to. His silence in that moment was a weight. Danny looked back at me. "Dad, if you've gotten yourself wound up over pharmacy paperwork and Mike's resentment, we should do this privately." "No." The word came out low and final. It landed harder than I expected because it was the first plain no I had given him in a long time without explanation attached. Something flashed in his face then, not rage. Something closer to contempt, interrupted too quickly for most people to catch it. But I caught it. He set his jaw and pulled out the chair nearest the mudroom door, not the one offered by the table center. Even sitting, he chose an angle that preserved his route to the threshold. I placed both hands on the table and looked at the first pile. "I'm going to walk through this," I said. "You may answer when I ask you to. If you interrupt to correct tone or sequence before I've finished, that will count against you in this room." He almost smiled. Against me with who? With me. That killed the smile entirely. I started with the open doctor's summary. The letter tucked behind the toaster manual. Then the bottle from Bell's. Marian's question about who had been picking up my refills, her documented concern about irregular custody and presentation. Evelyn's note in the envelope. "Call yourself, don't send D." I laid each item down in front of him as I named it, not dramatically, just plainly the way you lay out tools before a repair. He looked at the note without touching it. "I've never seen that before," he said. I know I said. That unsettled him more than argument would have. Then I moved to the October refill slip from the hospital evening, the November one from the chilly night, the January chart note with confusion language I never used. I placed Patel's message summaries beside the slips and showed the months lining up. Marian's pickup records aligned with your calls, your notations in the den aligned with the chart language. Family concern became documented pattern through you. Danny leaned back in his chair and folded his arms. "You're building a narrative out of half-overlapping admin noise." "No," Mike said for the first time. "He's dismantling yours." Danny turned toward him, and there it was. Again the soft face tightening at the edges into something proprietary and mean. "You always wanted this," Danny said. "You always wanted me to be the bad son because then you'd get to feel righteous from 2 counties away." Mike didn't move. "No. I wanted Dad to notice you were treating access like ownership. I treated access like responsibility because somebody had to. You treated it like power. Easy to say when you weren't here." I lifted one hand. "Not yet," I said. Danny looked back at me. "Dad, come on." That tone, that patient son tone. Almost amused, almost affectionate, built to make my seriousness look theatrical by comparison. I knew it now as craft. I took the yellow legal pad sheet from the stack and laid it in front of him. His own handwriting. "Call Patel if afternoon's worse, /move Thursday earlier, /Ruth Ann stop-ins. Not good, /Leah upsets mom." "You wrote this in my den." He did not answer immediately. "Looks like notes," he said. "About what?" "About taking care of 2 sick parents who weren't making life easy." The word easy struck me because it was so revealing in its casualness. Ruth Ann spoke then, voice flat and sharp as a cleaver. I was not a stop-in problem to be managed. Danny didn't turn to her. "You were upsetting Mom when she needed rest." Ruth Ann's laugh was short and vicious. "No, Daniel. I was dropping off food and saying hello to an old friend. You told me your father had bad confusion days and I shouldn't come by unannounced. You remember that part?" He looked at her now. "I said he was embarrassed by being seen when he wasn't feeling steady. You said agitated." He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. "You're splitting words." "No," I said. "You were." Leah reached for her phone and set it beside the envelope. "And Mom asked Marian not to let you pick up Dad's medication unless she called first." Danny's eyes flicked to the phone and then to her face. "Mom was under a lot of stress. She was under enough stress to know what she meant. She never accused me of anything." "No," I said. "She tried to slow down a pattern because she knew if she accused you, I'd defend you first." The room went still. There are truths you can prepare to say and truths that hurt differently once they are air. That one hurt with a clean edge because it implicated me in the same breath it named him. I had promised myself standing alone at the kitchen sink 2 nights earlier that if I was going to destroy false peace, I would not spare my own role in it. Now I had done it. The room did not collapse. That surprised me. Danny stared at me. "Who told you that?" he said quietly. "Your mother did," Leah said. "To all of us in pieces. You just counted on Dad never putting the pieces together." His face changed then in a way no one in the room could mistake. Not into monstrous rage, into insulted exposure. A decent mask can survive accusation. It survives poorly when multiple witnesses begin naming the mechanics. He leaned forward, elbows on knees, palms open. "All right," he said. "Let's say I overstepped. Let's say I managed too much. What do you think that was? Evil Mom was sick. Dad was falling apart. Mike was gone. Leah was in Cincinnati playing mediator by phone. Somebody had to keep things from going off the rails. The speech was almost good. That was the problem. It took every real pressure in the family and rearranged them until his control looked like consequence, not choice." I picked up Patel's note and read aloud, "Son reports father increasingly forgetful about whether meds already taken. Advised family monitoring until next follow-up." Then the next one, family reports periods of afternoon confusion. Then Marion's pickup summary. Then Evelyn's note. Then I looked at him and said, "Tell me exactly when I was increasingly forgetful." He said nothing. "Tell me." "You had mornings, 1, maybe 2, after your mother died. You told me you weren't sure sometimes. I told you once that grief had made one morning blur. That's all it takes when the meds are serious." There. That sentence. The room heard it together. Not what he said alone, but the way he said it. The proprietary certainty. The entitlement to define threshold. When the meds are serious. As if my body had become a system under his interpretation. I said, "And who gave you the right to turn one grief morning into a chart pattern?" He held my gaze. "Who was supposed to protect you?" "Dad." The question was meant to rescue him, meant to convert the room back to filial concern. It failed because by then, protection had a corpse underneath it. "My wife," I said, and my voice shook for the first time that evening. "Tried to protect me from you." No one moved. Danny sat very still. The stillness itself felt dangerous now. "That's not true," he said. "She asked Bells not to release refills through you without her voice. She was controlling everything by then, because she was afraid. She was sick. She was clear enough to leave notes." He looked at the note again, and for the first time some part of him lost its footing. Not enough for collapse. Enough for me to see the strain in his jaw and the effort it took him not to reach for the paper. Mike said, "Tell him about the hospital night." I picked up the October slip. "October 12th, 5:43 p.m. This refill was picked up when we were at St. Anne's with your mother. I never received that bag." Danny spread his hands. "How would I know what bag you remember opening 18 months later?" "Because you brought my jacket that night," I said. "Because you were there." "That proves nothing." "No," I said. "It proves you were in the sequence." Then I set beside it the consultation strip from November, then January, then Marion's record sheet, then the freezer label card marked post appointment, then his note about moving Thursday earlier. One by one. Not rushing, letting the table itself do the work. "This is not one mistake," I said. "It's a route. Pickups, calls, meals, summaries, visitors, chart, language, timing. You built a route through this house and through my body. You got there first, and then you told everyone what they were seeing." Leah touched her phone screen. Evelyn's voicemail filled the kitchen. Not loud, just loud enough. "If you happen to speak to Marion Bell before I do, tell her not to let him pick it up unless I call first. She'll know what I mean. Just tell her that. Don't make a story out of it." When it ended, the silence afterward was heavier than any shouted accusation could have been. Danny looked at the table, at the phone, at me. For a second, I thought he might finally break into anger. Instead, he did something worse. He smiled tiredly, like a man disappointed in weaker people. "Mom was sick," he said. "Everybody in this room knows that." She was anxious. She fixated on things. And now you're all using her last bad year to make yourselves feel better about what you weren't doing. It was an elegant cruelty, and because it was elegant, it might once have worked on me. He was trying to turn Evelyn's fear into illness, our guilt into motive, his sequence into misunderstood labor. I felt something in me harden to a final shape then. I took the leather envelope in my hands. Not because it was dramatic, because it was hers. Because for years I had seen it as a practical little relic of thrift and order. And because in that room with my son trying to use her sickness to wash himself clean, I understood that restoring her dignity required more than naming his control. It required naming her clarity. I held the envelope up just enough for all of us to see. "This is not a sick woman's panic," I said. My voice did not rise. It deepened. "This is your mother's work. This is how she protected what she could not say out loud, because she knew exactly what kind of house she was in. She kept dates. She changed folding patterns. She marked the months where the root shifted. She tried to build a spine under a piece I was too cowardly to examine." Danny opened his mouth. I cut him off with one look. "No," I said. "You do not get to use her illness against her in this room. Not once." That was the hero moment, though I did not know it by name then. I only knew that something in the room turned, not theatrically, morally. The old arrangement, Danny as interpreter, me as grateful father. Everyone else orbiting the version he offered finally lost its gravity. He felt it too. I could see it in the way his shoulders changed. The soft, patient posture fell away. What sat in the chair now was not a caring son misunderstood, but a man whose entitlement had been stripped of its best language. "All right," he said quietly. "You want truth? Yes, here's truth. You were slipping. Maybe not crazy, maybe not gone, but slipping. Mom knew it. I knew it. She couldn't keep track of everything with treatment, and you sure as hell couldn't, so I stepped in. Maybe I pushed too hard. Maybe I cleaned up things before you saw them because seeing them upset you. Maybe I kept visitors down because every drop-in sent Mom into a tailspin and left you pacing around with your blood pressure through the roof. Maybe I called the doctor because you'd never admit when something was wrong until it was almost on top of you. If you want to call that control, fine. But don't sit there acting like I did nothing but sit around plotting how to weaken you. No rant, no wild confession, just calm correction thickening into contempt." That was the full mask collapse. Not because he admitted the poison cleanly. Because he admitted the principle he believed his judgment entitled him to decide what I saw, what others were told, what came through the door, and how much of my own life I was fit to manage. "You hear yourself," Mike said. Danny swung on him. "I hear myself better than any of you hear reality." He was not doing okay. "No," I said. "I was grieving." "You were failing." The word hit the room like a slap. Leah made a small sound. Ruth Ann straightened so sharply her chair creaked. Mike took one step forward. I raised a hand, and he stopped. Because that was the final truth. Not the medicine, not the calls, not the labels, the moral betrayal under all of it. Danny had decided that grief in an aging father was failure to be managed, and because he believed that every trespass became reasonable in his own mind. I said, "And your answer to my failing was to make me look less competent than I was." He didn't answer. That's what the chart language did. He looked away. That's what the visitor screening did. He stayed silent. That's what the pickups did. Nothing. That's what turning one blurred morning into a pattern did. Still nothing. Then very quietly he said, "It kept things stable." There it was. No confession of malicious dosage, no melodramatic speech, just the monstrous smallness of a man calling his father's reduced agency stable. I placed the envelope back on the table with great care. "Listen to me," I said. He looked up. "You are finished managing this house. You are finished speaking to my doctors. You are finished picking up medication in my name. You are finished telling neighbors who gets through the side door. You are finished writing my weakness into rooms before I enter them." He started to stand. "You can't." "I can." Now my voice rose. Not in hysteria, in force. "This is my house. This is my name. This is my body. And you do not get to call control devotion because you learned how to say it softly." No one breathed. Then I went on, because the hardest part remained. "And hear this too. I helped you. I let usefulness stand in for goodness. I let your brother's distance excuse my laziness as a father. I let your mother carry fear privately because peace was easier for me than scrutiny. That is on me." The words hurt as they left me, but once spoken they steadied the room further because they took away his last refuge that this was merely siblings and neighbors whipping an old man into confusion. No. I was there, accountable, awake. Danny's face had gone pale under the skin. He looked for one disorienting second much younger. Then that passed and something hard set in instead. "So what now?" he asked. "You call the police because I brought soup too often?" "No," Mike said. "He calls the people whose job it is to document elder abuse patterns." Danny's head snapped toward him. "You self-righteous son of a bitch." Mike didn't move. I picked up the folder Patel's office had sent and the written summary from Marion. Beside them sat the notarized statement Ruth Ann had signed on her way over from the UPS store because Mike, thank God, thought one step farther than I did in practical matters when the time came. Leah's phone sat beside it with the voicemail saved and duplicated to my email 15 minutes earlier. "I already have," I said. That landed. I watched him understand it, not vaguely, precisely, the calls I had made that day. Carla's note in my file, Marion's written record, Patel's documentation, the witness statements, the revoked contact authorization, the garage code changed, the side door locked. By the time he sat in my kitchen, the house had already stopped being available to his version. "You called who?" he said. "Adult Protective Services. My doctor, my pharmacist, and my attorney." I had not called the attorney yet at the time I first planned the evening, but by 3:30 I had left a message with Gordon Lyle, who had handled our wills and deed work for 20 years. He had not called back before 6, but the message existed, and by then the sentence belonged to me as truth in motion. Danny stared at me. "You do that to your own son." The phrasing almost stopped me. Almost. The old hook. Blood over truth. But there comes a point where refusing the hook is the whole moral act. "No," I said. "I'd do it for my wife, for myself, and for what's left of this family after you." Leah cried, then silently, head bowed. Ruth Ann reached across and put one hand over hers. Mike still stood with his hand on the chair back jaw, clenched so hard the tendon in his neck showed. Danny looked around the room once more. I could see him searching for the old angle, a softer witness, a weaker heart, a root. There was none. When he stood this time, it was slower. "All right," he said. His voice had flattened. "Then I know where I stand." "Yes," I said, "outside." He laughed once under his breath. "You think Mike will take care of you?" "I think I will." That answer stopped him more than anything else I'd said all evening. He moved toward the mudroom. At the threshold he turned back, and for the first time there was no softness left at all. "You'll regret making me the villain of this," he said. I stood where I was. "No," I said. "I regret making you the heir to a power you never earned." He went out through the side door. I closed it behind him and turned the deadbolt while the truck door was still slamming outside. The sound of the lock moving into place did not feel triumphant. It felt exact. No one spoke until the truck had backed out and the road noise was gone. Then the room exhaled, all at once. Leah put both hands over her face and wept not loudly, but with the helpless release of someone who has been holding back floodwater with her body for years. Ruth Ann stood and crossed to her one hand at her shoulder. the other smoothing her own skirt because that was what she did before unpleasant truths, and after them too. Mike walked to the sink and stood with both palms flat on the counter, head down. I remained where I was, one hand still resting on the back of the chair, looking at the door through which my son had just left my house as a stranger to its authority. Not innocence restored, never that. Truth restored to sequence. That was the best the night could give. The practical part came next because life, even at its most devastating, insists on paperwork. Marion called back first. I stepped into the den with the folder and gave her the outline of what had occurred. She said she had already forwarded her written summary to the contact at Adult Protective Services who'd called her that afternoon for confirmation. She also said she would no longer release any medication connected to my file through family proxy, without my physical presence or direct physician-coordinated authorization. Her voice remained calm, exact, unsentimental. When I thanked her, she paused and said, "Your wife was not imagining what she saw." I had to sit down in the desk chair to hear the rest of the call. Then Gordon Lyle returned my message from his home office. I told him in the plainest terms possible that I needed an immediate review of all access permissions, healthcare proxies, property keys, garage codes, and any standing authority that might have relied on family convenience since my wife's illness. He asked if there had been exploitation. I said, "There has been domestic control through caregiving channels, and I am documenting it." He said he would meet me at 9 the next morning. After that came the APS on-call worker, a woman named Denise Holloway, who sounded neither shocked nor casual, which I appreciated. I told the story in brief, then in detail where she requested it. She asked whether I felt safe overnight. I looked through the den doorway at Mike standing in the kitchen still near the sink and said yes. She asked whether the son had keys. I said not effectively anymore. She asked whether there had been physical violence. I said no. She asked whether there had been medication mismanagement, social isolation, false reports to providers, and unauthorized gatekeeping of contact. I said yes, 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 and yes. When I hung up, my hands shook so badly I had to put them on my knees. The night after that moved strangely, slow and fast together. Ruth Ann stayed until 9:30. Before leaving, she stood in the mudroom and looked at the side door. "Your wife hated that he stopped knocking," she said. I closed my eyes for a second. I know that now. She'd stand right where you are and wait half a beat before answering him, just to force the door back into being a door. That broke me more than the evening had. Not visibly. I did not collapse or cry out. I simply had to lean one shoulder against the wall because the image was so small, so domestic, and so terribly brave in its scale. Evelyn tired from treatment standing at the mudroom threshold and inserting half a second of resistance into an entry everyone else called harmless. When Ruth Ann had gone, Leah remained at the table while Mike loaded the empty coffee cups into the dishwasher. "I should have come when she left the voicemail," Leah said. "Yes, I know." She looked up at me through swollen eyes. "Can you ever forgive that?" I thought about the question carefully because I was tired enough to lie if I reached too quickly. Then I said I don't know yet, but I know I'm done protecting us from the truth of what we did wrong. She nodded. Tears gathered again, but she held them this time. Mike shut the dishwasher and finally sat. He looked older than he had that morning. So did I expect. Exposure ages a room. "What happens with Danny now?" Leah asked. No one answered right away. At last, Mike said, "Consequences?" She looked at him. "That's not a plan." "No," he said. "It's a condition." I said, "Tomorrow." APS, Gordon, Patel, Marion, the locks, the file permissions, the keys. I looked at both of them. After that, whatever truth survives, contact with daylight. That was as much as any honest man could promise. Leah left close to 11, hugging me hard in the mudroom in a way she had not since Evelyn's funeral. When she let go, she touched the side door frame with her fingertips and said almost to herself, "She was always here." Then she went out into the cool night and drove away. Mike and I cleaned the kitchen in tired silence. Not the papers. Those stayed, but the cups, the crumbs, the tissue Leah had left by her chair, the cold coffee Danny never drank. Familiar motions returning after a family wound has been cut open feel both absurd and essential. You wipe the table because the table still exists. You rinse spoons because the house must know it has not become only a crime scene. Yet it had become that too, an emotional crime scene certainly, and maybe more than emotional. The distinction mattered to agencies and charts and law. It mattered less in my blood. By midnight, the house was quiet again. Mike went upstairs to the guest room. I remained in the kitchen one last time, not to investigate now, but to feel what the room was after truth. The calendar still bore Danny's black marker circles. The den doorway still stood open. The side door still reflected my shape in its narrow glass. But the room no longer felt managed by absence. It felt witness-bearing. Changed, not innocent, not hostile. Something after both. I took the envelope from the center of the table and held it in both hands. The leather had warmed from the room. I traced the nick at one corner and thought of Danny as a boy with a butter knife. Thought of Evelyn laughing and saying no money, just consequences. Thought of how often in marriage we mistake domestic habits for temperament when they are, in fact, strategy, fear, refusal, or courage. The envelope was not merely where she kept receipts. It was how she kept herself from disappearing entirely into everybody else's version of events. I said aloud into the kitchen, "I know now." No answer came. None was needed. The next week was full of official things, and because life is not kind enough to spare paperwork when your heart is breaking, I went through them one by one. A PS came Tuesday afternoon. Denise Holloway was in her 50s, wore sensible flats, asked clean questions, and never once tried to comfort me out of my own account. She sat at the table with the folder Mike and I had assembled, listened to Marion by speakerphone, reviewed Ruth Ann's written statement, and took down the sequence of doctor calls and access control. She did not promise outcomes she could not guarantee. She did say quietly, "This meets the pattern for coercive eldercare exploitation." Hearing the phrase from an outside mouth did not give me satisfaction. It gave me shape. Gordon Lyle came Wednesday morning and moved through my paperwork with the ruthless efficiency of a man who has spent 30 years watching families fail in predictable paperwork ways. We revoked, reassigned, updated. He changed emergency contact hierarchy, struck Danny's access from every document that mattered, recorded the garage code change, and arranged for the locks to be rekeyed Friday. He also looked at me once over the rim of his glasses and said, "Tom, convenience is not a legal principle." I told him I had learned that too late. Patel saw me. Thursday alone. Alone in the exam room, alone answering questions, alone describing my mornings, my sleep, my blood pressure, my actual memory. It was an unexpectedly emotional thing, speaking about my own body, without another person leaning in first to translate it. Patel apologized more directly than doctors usually do. I accepted it because there was no use in theater by then, but I did not let him off easily. "You should have made him leave the room," I said. He said, "Yes." That was enough. Danny called 3 times across those days and texted 9. I answered none of them. His messages shifted in shape as control became impossible. First concern, then indignation, then legal-sounding language about false allegations. Then, finally, one line that told me more truth than any confession would have: I did everything because no one else would keep this family together. That was his creed distilled. Not love. Arrangement. Family as a system he was entitled to stabilize by force if necessary. I saved the message in the folder. He did not come back to the house. Mike stayed the week. That was its own quiet reckoning. We did not become magically easy with each other. There were still old frictions built into silence. He still moved through rooms like a guest in the place that had once made him. I still caught myself almost explaining Danny away in stray habits of thought and had to stop. But there was something new underneath all of it, clean ground. On Friday evening, after the locksmith had gone and the new brass on the side door looked too bright for the old paint around it, Mike and I stood in the mudroom with the door open to the cooling air. The yard smelled like thawing earth and cut cedar from someone's fence repair down the road. A dog barked twice somewhere toward the next block. A basketball thudded on a driveway and stopped. Ordinary neighborhood sounds. The sort that had once passed through this doorway without feeling like entry reports. You know, Mike said I hated this door. I looked at him. Why? He leaned one shoulder against the frame hands in his pockets. Because he always got here first. Not physically every time, but structurally. He glanced toward the kitchen. You'd already be on his rhythm before anybody else came in. That hurt. It also fit too well to deny. I'm sorry, I said. This time he did not deflect it. He nodded once, looking out into the yard. I know. There are apologies that reopen a wound and apologies that begin cleaning one. This felt like the second kind. Saturday morning, Leah came over with banana bread and her old laptop to help me back up Evelyn's voicemail and scan the receipts Marion wanted copies of for the file. She stayed through lunch, and we worked at the kitchen table with the scanner humming and papers feeding through in careful order. At one point, she touched one of the folded slips and said, "She knew you'd need paper because words would be contested." That line stayed with me. It gave Evelyn back some of what illness and my own blindness had taken. Not sainthood. She did not deserve that flattening either. She deserved the truth she had seen danger misjudged the speed at which she could manage it quietly, and tried anyway. By Sunday, the house had settled into a different kind of calm. Not healed. Houses do not heal. They absorb and hold. But the rooms no longer seemed to belong to his timing. The den door stayed closed unless I opened it. The calendar came off the refrigerator and went into the recycling black marker circles and all. I replaced it with a smaller one from the junk drawer in my own handwriting. The freezer got cleared of old labeled containers until only what I recognized remained. The sideboard held my mail in the ceramic tray again unopened until I stood there myself. In the afternoon after Leah left and Mike came back from a walk to the park with his jacket zipped against the wind, I found myself carrying the envelope to the mudroom and sitting down on the floor. It was not planned. My knees complained. The linoleum was cool through my jeans, but the moment I sat there with the wall at my back and the side door cracked open to let in the last of the day's air, I knew why the body had chosen the place. This was where Evelyn had sorted groceries, where she had answered Ruth Ann, where she had slowed the door by half a second, where Danny had crossed too easily too often, where the house had changed meaning under my feet without my consent. Mike came to the doorway, saw me, and stopped. "You all right?" "No," I said. Then after a moment, "Sit down anyway." He looked at the floor at the envelope in my hands, then lowered himself with more care than he would once have admitted he needed. We sat side by side on the mudroom floor like two men waiting for a ride that wasn't coming. I opened the envelope and emptied the slips into my lap. The late afternoon light lay gold across the threshold and caught the edges of the paper. Some slips were smooth with handling, some still crisp, some folded into the hard quarters that now meant more to me than entire speeches. I handed Mike the October hospital slip. He took it without comment. I kept the one with Evelyn's note for myself. We sorted in silence at first. By month, by medication, by what had worried her, by what had only been routine, the side door stood open just enough to let in cool air and the smell of damp earth. Somewhere in the house, the refrigerator started up. A crow called from the maple and was answered farther off. The ordinary world went on, which felt both insulting and merciful. After a while, Mike said, "She must have been scared." Yes. I turned the note over again and looked at the indentation where the pen had pressed harder on "Don't send D." She was also brave, I said. He nodded. Yes. That was the thing I most wanted to reclaim for Evelyn. Not innocence, not myth, but scale. She had not solved the danger. She had not saved us cleanly. She had delayed, minimized, protected peace too long and suffered for it. So had I. So had all of us in different ways. But she had not been merely passive, and I would not let her be remembered that way. The envelope in my lap was proof of her mind still working under pressure of her refusal to let the family story become the only archive. Mike took another slip from the pile and smoothed it flat on the floor between us. I keep thinking about what she said, he said. Which part? He gets there first. He gave a faint breath through his nose. It sounds simple, but it's the whole thing. Yes. Because the real crime had not only been in pills or pickup bags or chart notes. It had been in sequence, in who arrived first to meaning, who named weakness before I did, who defined concern, who opened the mail first, who greeted the neighbor at the threshold, who sat in the den with the phone, who reached the room before the truth. That finally was what I had taken back. I leaned my head once against the wall behind us and closed my eyes for a second. Not from exhaustion, from the strange clean ache of aftermath. I loved him, I said. Mike was quiet. Then I know. I still do. I know. That doesn't change anything. No. He did not force me to choose between love and judgment. That maybe more than anything else was the new thing between us. The understanding that love did not excuse and judgment did not erase. We kept sorting. At the bottom of the envelope, caught in the lining seam, I found one last narrow strip of pharmacy bag paper folded twice. No note this time. Just a date and a pickup time from the spring before Evelyn died. On the back in tiny pencil, one word. Watch. I stared at it until the light thinned. Mike looked over. What? I handed it to him. He read it once, then handed it back. Neither of us spoke. That word did not feel like a final clue in the cheap sense. It felt like her last surviving instruction to the man I had been before I was willing to obey it. Watch, not panic, not accuse, not preserve peace. Watch. Too late for her, not too late for the truth. I folded the strip carefully and placed it with the note. Evening moved slowly into the mudroom, softening the edges of the floor, the bench, the open door frame. The air coming through the crack in the door grew cooler. Somewhere down the road, someone started a grill, and the faint smell of charcoal drifted into the yard. A child laughed. A screen door banged. The neighborhood went on being a neighborhood, and because of that, the quiet inside the house no longer felt like suspense. It felt like a life resuming in altered shape. Mike gathered the last month pile into a neat stack and set it by the envelope. We should put them back, he said. In the envelope. Yes. I looked at the brown leather in my lap and shook my head once. Not all at once. So instead we made two piles, one to copy and keep with the formal folder for agencies and doctors and lawyers. One to return to the envelope because some things belonged there, not as evidence now, but as the record of how Evelyn had tried to hold the line in a house that kept asking her not to name what she saw. When we were done, I placed the selected slips back inside. The leather took their weight the way it always had, plainly, without ceremony. The light had thinned to amber by then. Mike stood slowly, knees stiff, and offered me a hand. I took it. Not because I could not get up alone, though maybe I couldn't have elegantly. Because he offered it without taking the room away from me. Once on my feet, I left the side door open another minute longer than necessary. The evening air moved through the mudroom across the floor where we had been sitting over the envelope in my hands. Then I set the envelope on the bench, not hidden in the drawer, yet not elevated into shrine, just resting there in the open where a useful household thing rests after honest work. I looked into the kitchen. The table was cleared. The lamp over the sink was off. The den door remained shut. No black marker circles on the refrigerator. No grocery bag by the bread box. No one entering without acknowledgement. The house was still the same house. Maple cabinets, mudroom bench, sideboard, window over the sink. But it no longer belonged to the false arrangement I had confused with care. Something had been reclaimed. Something could not be recovered. That seemed right. Mike stood beside me, looking where I was looking. After a while, he said, "You want dinner." I almost laughed, not because it was funny, because that was how life insisted on dignity, returning not through speeches, but through the need to decide whether two men on a Sunday evening should make eggs or order Chinese. "Eggs," I said. He nodded. We went into the kitchen together, and I left the mudroom door open just a little longer so the cool air could keep moving through the house.